I stood in the pouring rain with a trash bag in my hand and a lie in my heart. My own son, Terrence, slammed the door in my face because I looked like a beggar. His wife, Victoria, told me I would stain their Italian rugs. They were ready to let me freeze. But they didn't know that the shivering old man on their doorstep was secretly the owner of the very bank holding their mortgage. They didn't know that the next morning, my lawyer would arrive not with a plea for help, but with a $60 million check and an eviction notice. I am Winston Carter, and this is how I taught my ungrateful children the hardest lesson of their lives. If you have ever been underestimated by the people you sacrificed everything for, hit that like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments which city you are watching from. The rain was not just falling, it was punishing me. It was a cold, relentless sheet of water that soaked through the thin, moth-eaten wool coat I had bought from a thrift store 3 days ago. I stood before the iron gates of the estate in an upscale Atlanta suburb. I knew the code to the gate because I was the one who paid for it. I was the one who paid for the winding driveway, the manicured hedges, and the neo-colonial mansion that loomed in the distance like a fortress of arrogance. But tonight, I did not punch in the code. I needed to see them. I needed to see who they truly were when they thought I had nothing left to give. I pressed the intercom button. My finger was trembling, partially from the biting cold, but mostly from a terrifying sense of dread that had settled in my stomach. The static hiss of the speaker was the only sound for a long minute. Then, a voice cut through the noise. It was a voice I knew, but it lacked the syrupy sweetness it usually held when she wanted a vacation to Paris or a new luxury SUV. "Who is it?" the voice snapped. "We are not buying anything, and we have a security system, so I suggest you move along before I call the police." It was Victoria, my daughter-in-law. She sounded annoyed, as if my mere presence at her gate was an interruption to her perfect life. I leaned closer to the speaker, water dripping from the brim of my hat onto my nose. "It is me, Victoria. It is Winston. Ideally, I would have said, it is your father-in-law, the man who funded your wedding," but the words stuck in my throat. There was a pause, a long, heavy silence that hurt more than the freezing rain. I imagined her inside, standing on heated floors, glass of wine in hand, rolling her eyes. "Winston," she finally said, her tone shifting from aggression to a cold confusion. "What are you doing here? You know Terrence is hosting the charity gala tonight. You cannot just show up unannounced. And why do you sound like you are outside? Where is your driver?" I took a breath, letting the icy air fill my lungs. "I do not have a driver, Victoria. Please, just open the gate. I am cold." The buzz of the electronic lock sounded like a gunshot in the quiet neighborhood. The heavy iron gates swung open slowly. I began the long walk up the driveway. My old boots, scuffed and leaking, squelched against the wet asphalt. To my left, the garage was full. I recognized Terrence's Porsche and Victoria's Range Rover, along with several other luxury cars belonging to their guests. To my right, the garden was illuminated by tasteful landscape lighting, highlighting the statues and fountains that I knew cost more than what most families earned in a year. I reached the massive double doors of the main entrance. The shelter of the portico provided a moment of relief from the downpour. I raised my hand to knock, but before my knuckles could touch the wood, the door cracked open just an inch. Victoria's face appeared in the gap. She was stunning, I had to admit that. A former model, she knew how to present herself. She was wearing a silver evening gown that shimmered under the porch lights, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed. But her eyes were narrow, scanning me from head to toe with a look of pure revulsion. She did not open the door wider. She blocked it with her body. "Winston, look at you," she hissed, keeping her voice low so the guests inside wouldn't hear. "You are dripping wet. You look like... My God, you look like a homeless person. What is that smell? Is that mildew?" I looked down at my clothes. It was part of the act, but her reaction was so visceral, so cruel, that it felt like a physical blow. "I need to come in, Victoria. I need to talk to Terrence. It is an emergency." "No, absolutely not," she said, pushing the door slightly to close it further. "You are not coming in through the front door looking like that. We have the mayor inside. We have investors. You will ruin the aesthetic. If you must come in, go around to the service entrance in the back. The kitchen staff can give you a towel. Do not, and I repeat, do not let anyone see you." She slammed the door. The sound echoed in the night air. I stood there for a moment, staring at the polished wood, trying to process what had just happened. My daughter-in-law, the woman who had cried tears of joy when I handed her the keys to this very house 5 years ago, had just told me to use the servants' entrance because my poverty was an eyesore. I tightened my grip on the black plastic trash bag that held my few belongings. I walked off the porch and back into the rain, trudging through the muddy grass around the side of the house. The humiliation burned in my chest, hotter than any fire. I passed the large bay windows of the living room. Inside, the world was golden and warm. I saw waiters with silver trays moving through the crowd. I saw men in tuxedos laughing, throwing their heads back. And there, in the center of it all, was my son, Terrence. He looked just like me when I was 40, tall, broad-shouldered, with a smile that could sell ice to an Eskimo. He was holding a crystal tumbler of whiskey, charming a circle of people. He looked powerful. He looked successful. He looked like the CEO I had trained him to be. But it was all a facade. I knew the truth. I knew about the bad investments he tried to hide from the board. I knew about the gambling debts he thought were secret. I handed him the keys to Carter Holdings because I thought he was ready. But standing there in the mud, watching him play the part of a king while his father walked to the back door like a stray dog, I realized I had failed him. I had given him the wealth, but I had forgotten to teach him the value of the hands that built it. I reached the back patio. The service door was locked. I knocked, but the kitchen was chaotic, the staff too busy preparing hors d'oeuvres to hear a soft rap on the glass. I had no choice. I huddled under the small overhang of the back roof, shivering uncontrollably now. The temperature was dropping, and my wet clothes clung to my skin like a shroud. Suddenly, the sliding glass door of the sunroom opened. Terrence stepped out, closing the door quickly behind him to keep the noise of the party inside. He had spotted me through the glass. He didn't look worried. He looked furious. He marched across the patio, his expensive Italian loafers clicking on the stone. He grabbed my arm, his grip tight and aggressive, and dragged me further into the shadows, away from the windows where his guests might see. "Dad, what the hell is wrong with you?" he growled, his voice a low, angry whisper. "Victoria told me you were here. Why are you dressed like a bum? Do you have any idea who is inside? I have the managing partners of Apex Capital in there. If they see my father looking like a vagrant, do you know what that does to my stock price?" He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask why I was wet. He didn't ask why I was carrying a trash bag. His only concern was his image, his stock price. I looked at him, water dripping from my nose. I pulled my arm from his grasp. "I lost it, Terrence," I said, my voice raspy and weak. It wasn't entirely acting. The cold had settled deep in my bones. "What do you mean you lost it? Did you lose your wallet? Is that it? You walked here?" "No," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "I lost everything. The retirement fund, the offshore accounts, the investments. It was a Ponzi scheme, son. I was scammed. They took it all. The bank foreclosed on my townhouse this morning. They took the car. I have nothing left but what is in this bag." I watched his face closely. I was looking for a flicker of concern, a spark of empathy. I was waiting for him to say, "Oh God, Dad, I am so sorry. Come inside, we will fix this." Instead, his face went pale, then red. His eyes darted back to the party, then back to me. He ran a hand over his face, messing up his perfect haircut. "Are you serious? You are telling me you are broke?" "Completely," I lied. "I have nowhere to go, Terrence. I need a place to stay, just for a while, until I get back on my feet." He let out a sharp, bitter laugh. He stepped back from me, as if poverty were a contagious disease. "This is unbelievable," he muttered, pacing in a small circle on the wet patio. "You were the great Winston Carter, the titan of logistics, and you let yourself get scammed like some senile old fool? How could you be so stupid?" I lowered my head, feigning shame. "I trusted the wrong people, son. I am sorry." "I am cold, Terrence. Can I please come inside?" He stopped pacing and looked at me. His eyes were cold, calculating. He wasn't looking at his father. He was looking at a liability. He was looking at a problem that needed to be managed. "You can't go in there, Dad. Look at you. You smell like wet dog and failure. Victoria just had the upholstery redone in the guest rooms. So where am I supposed to sleep? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He looked around the patio, his eyes landing on the detached garage structure where the gardening equipment was stored. He sighed, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a handkerchief. He wiped his hand where he had touched my wet coat, as if he needed to sanitize himself. Look, you can't stay in the house tonight. It is impossible. The gala is going late, and we have guests staying over. Important guests. I can't explain this. He gestured at me with disdain. Go to the tool shed behind the garage. It has a roof. It is dry. There are some old drop cloths in there you can use as blankets. The tool shed. He was putting his father, the man who paid for his Ivy League education, the man who bought him his first car, his first house, his first company, in a shed with lawnmowers and rakes. Terrence, please, I said, allowing a tremor into my voice. It is freezing. It is just for tonight, Dad. Stop being dramatic, he snapped. I will have the kitchen staff bring you a plate of food later, but you stay out of sight. Do you hear me? If anyone asks, you are the new groundskeeper that I hired out of charity. Do not speak to my guests. He turned his back on me. He didn't wait for an answer. He adjusted his silk tie, smoothed his jacket, and opened the sliding door. A blast of warm air and laughter spilled out for a second before he slid it shut, sealing himself back into his world of luxury and locking me out in the cold. I stood there for a moment, the rain masking the tears that I refused to let fall. I felt the weight of the secret phone in my inner pocket. It was a satellite phone, fully charged, connected directly to my lawyer, Mr. Henderson. I could make one call, and this entire charade would end. I could have security teams here in 10 minutes. I could have Terrence escorted off the property he didn't realize he didn't actually own. But I didn't reach for the phone, not yet. The pain in my chest was sharp, a mixture of heartbreak and a terrifying clarity. I needed to see how deep the rot went. I needed to know if there was anything left of the boy I raised, or if the money had consumed him completely. I turned and walked toward the dark shape of the tool shed. I opened the creaking wooden door and stepped inside. The smell of gasoline and fertilizer filled my nose. It was dark, cold, and damp. I found a pile of canvas drop cloths in the corner, stiff with dried paint and dirt. I sat down on a wooden crate, pulling the canvas around my shoulders. My stomach grumbled. I hadn't eaten since breakfast, preparing for this role. I waited. An hour passed, then 2. The music from the house thumped in the distance, a steady rhythm of celebration while I sat in the dark. Finally, the door creaked open. It was not a member of the kitchen staff. It was Terrence. He was holding a paper plate covered with a napkin. He didn't step inside, he just leaned in, extending his arm. Here, he said. I took the plate. It was cold. I lifted the napkin. It was half a sandwich and some congealed cheese cubes. Leftovers. Scraps from the party. Eat that, he said, checking his watch. I have to get back. We will figure out what to do with you in the morning. But do not expect to stay here, Dad. Victoria and I have a reputation to maintain. We can't be running a homeless shelter. He closed the door, plunging me back into darkness. I took a bite of the stale sandwich, the bread dry in my mouth. It tasted like ash. I sat there in the silence of the shed, listening to the rain hammer against the tin roof, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly poor. Not because I lacked money, but because I realized I had no family. But the night was not over, and I had more children to visit. The test had only just begun. The cold inside the tool shed was not just a temperature, it was a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I sat on the wooden crate for what felt like hours, listening to the rain drum against the metal roof. My stomach growled, a hollow ache that reminded me I had not eaten a proper meal since the morning before. I knew I had to try one last time. I could not sleep here. At my age, a night on a damp concrete floor could turn into pneumonia by morning. I stood up, my joints popping in protest, and walked back out into the storm. I approached the back patio door again. The party inside was winding down. The music had softened to a low jazz hum. I saw shadows moving against the curtains. I raised my hand to knock, but before I could, the door slid open. It wasn't Terrence this time. It was Victoria. She stepped out, wrapping a cashmere shawl tighter around her shoulders, as if the mere sight of me made the air colder. The smell of her perfume, a heavy floral scent that I knew cost $300 an ounce, wafted over me, masking the smell of the rain and the gasoline from the shed. She did not look at my face. She looked at my boots, muddy and wet on her patio stones. "What are you doing out here, Winston?" she asked, her voice sharp and devoid of any warmth. "Terrence told you to stay in the shed." "Victoria, please," I said, my voice trembling not just from the cold, but from the humiliation of having to beg. "It is freezing out here. I cannot sleep in a tool shed. I know you have the guest suite on the first floor, the one with the separate entrance. I would not bother anyone. I just need a bed and a warm room for tonight. I promise I will be gone before your guests wake up." She let out a short, incredulous laugh. She crossed her arms over her chest, the diamonds on her wrist catching the light from the garden lamps. "The guest suite," she repeated, as if I had asked to sleep in the master bedroom. "That is impossible. We are renovating it. The contractors have the whole room torn apart. There is dust everywhere. It is not habitable." I looked at her, and for a second, I forgot my role. I forgot I was supposed to be the broken, bankrupt father. I almost laughed in her face. I knew she was lying. I knew because I monitored the expenses of the construction company that Terrence used for all his projects. There were no invoices for a renovation here. There were no permits pulled. The room was perfectly fine. She just didn't want me in it. "Victoria," I said, keeping my voice low, "I can sleep on the floor if I have to. Just inside. Please." She took a step back, her face twisting into a sneer of pure disgust. "No," she snapped. "Absolutely not. Look at you, Winston. You are filthy. You smell like mildew and street trash. I just had the carpets in that hallway imported from Milan. Do you have any idea how much they cost? I am not going to let you ruin my home because you were too stupid to manage your own money." Just then, Terrence appeared behind her. He looked flushed, his tie loosened, a glass of scotch in his hand. He saw me and groaned, a sound of deep, exhausted irritation. "Dad, I told you to stay put," he said, stepping out to stand beside his wife. "Why are you making this difficult? Your father wants to sleep in the guest suite," Victoria said, turning to her husband with a look of disbelief. "Can you believe the audacity? He shows up here looking like a beggar and demands the best room in the house." "I did not demand the best room," I said softly. "I just asked for a roof that does not leak, Terrence." Terrence looked at me, then at Victoria. For a fleeting moment, I saw a flash of shame in his eyes. He knew this was wrong. He knew that the man standing in the rain was the same man who had paid for the roof over his head. But then he looked at Victoria, at her angry, expectant face, and his spine collapsed. He chose his wife's approval over his father's dignity. "Victoria is right, Dad," he said, looking at the ground. "The house it is too complicated right now. We cannot have you inside. The shed is the only option. It is dry. It is out of the wind. You will be fine for one night." "But Terrence," I started. "Enough," Victoria cut in, her voice raising. "I do not want to hear it. I do not want this dirty old man in my house, Terrence. He is embarrassing. What if the neighbors see him? What if the mayor sees him when he leaves? Get him out of here, or get him back in the shed, but do not let him cross this threshold." She turned and marched back inside, slamming the sliding door with enough force to rattle the glass. Terrence stood there for a moment, swaying slightly. He looked at me, then sighed, rubbing his temples. "You heard her, Dad. Just go back to the shed. I will bring you some food. Just stop causing a scene." He turned his back on me and went inside. I was left alone in the dark, the rain running down my face like tears I refused to shed. I turned and walked slowly back to the tool shed. My heart felt like a stone in my chest. It wasn't just the refusal, it was the ease of it. It was how quickly they discarded me the moment I became an inconvenience. I went back into the shed and sat down on the hard wooden crate. My body was shivering violently now. I pulled the stiff, paint-stained canvas drop cloths around me, trying to trap whatever body heat I had left. The smell of gasoline made me nauseous. I waited. 20 minutes later, the door opened again. Terrence stood there, silhouetted against the lights of the main house. He didn't come in. He just reached out and placed a paper plate and a bottle of water on a stack of tires near the door. "Here," he said abruptly. "Eat this." I waited until he left, until I heard his footsteps fade away on the gravel path, before I stood up. My legs were stiff and painful. I walked over to the tires and picked up the plate. It was uncovered. Raindrops had already started to speckle the food. I took it back to my crate and sat down. I looked at what my son, the multimillionaire, had brought his starving father. It was leftovers, scraps. There was a half-eaten slider, the bun soggy and cold, with a bite mark clearly visible on one side. There was a pile of potato salad that had started to turn yellow at the edges, congealed and unappetizing. There were a few shrimp tails, stripped of their meat, as if someone had just scraped their plate onto mine, and a piece of stale baguette, hard as a rock. I stared at the plate, and a lump formed in my throat so large I could barely breathe. I remembered Terrence's 16th birthday. I remembered it vividly. He had wanted a pool party. I rented out the entire country club. I hired a celebrity chef to fly in from New York to cook for his friends. I remembered watching him eat lobster and Wagyu beef, laughing, happy, surrounded by abundance. I had spared no expense because he was my son. I wanted him to have the best. I wanted him to never know hunger or want. And this was his repayment, a half-eaten burger and shrimp tails. I picked up the cold, soggy slider. My hand shook. I took a bite, avoiding the side with the bite mark. It tasted like ash. It tasted like betrayal. Tears finally spilled over, hot and stinging on my cold cheeks. I ate the scraps in the dark, surrounded by rusty lawnmowers and spiders, while my son slept in a king-sized bed under a roof I paid for. I ate because I needed the strength. I needed to survive the night. But with every swallow, a piece of my love for him died, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Hours passed. The rain stopped, leaving behind a silence that was heavy and oppressive. The cold intensified. I could not feel my toes. My throat was parched. The salty, processed food had made me incredibly thirsty, and the small bottle of water Terrence had left was long gone. I needed water. I couldn't wait until morning. I stood up, wrapping the canvas around me like a cape. I opened the shed door slowly, trying to keep the hinges from squeaking. The main house was dark, save for a few security lights and a warm glow coming from the kitchen window. I crept across the wet grass, moving like a ghost in my own property. I intended to find a garden hose, a spigot, anything to get a drink. As I neared the kitchen patio, I heard voices. They were low, hushed, but angry. I froze. I pressed myself against the brick wall, just beside the open kitchen window. The screen was down, but the glass was raised a few inches, letting the cool night air into the house. It was Terrence and Victoria. "I cannot believe he is actually here," Victoria hissed. Her voice was not shrill now, it was venomous and low. "This ruins everything, Terrence. We were supposed to go to the Hamptons next week. How are we supposed to explain him to our friends? Oh, this is Terrence's dad. He lives in the garden shed because he is a failure." "Keep your voice down," Terrence whispered back, sounding frantic. "Do you think I wanted this?" "He said he lost everything, Victoria. Everything. The retirement accounts, the stocks, the house. He is wiped out." "So what does that mean for us?" she demanded. "It means he is useless," Terrence said, and the word hit me like a physical slap. "It means there is no inheritance coming. It means there is no safety net. We are on our own." "We are already drowning, Terrence," she shot back. "You told me the bank called again yesterday. We are 3 months behind on the mortgage. The credit cards are maxed out. We needed his money to bail us out. If he is broke, then we are finished." I held my breath, my hand clutching the rough brick of the wall. I knew they were living beyond their means, but I had no idea it was this bad. 3 months behind on the mortgage held by my bank. "We are not finished," Terrence said, his voice taking on a desperate, scheming edge. "We just have to be smart. We cannot keep him here. He is a drain on resources we do not have." "So what do we do?" Victoria asked. "Tomorrow morning, I am kicking him out," Terrence said. His voice was cold, devoid of any filial affection. "I will give him $50 and tell him to catch a bus to the city. There are shelters there. He is not our problem, Victoria. We have to focus on saving the house. If he stays, he will just drag us down with him. I am not going to let a washed-up old man ruin my reputation." "He is your father," Victoria said, but there was no compassion in it, only a testing of his resolve. "He was my father when he had money," Terrence replied. Now he is just a liability. I will get rid of him first thing in the morning. I promise." I stood there in the dark, my hand trembling as it reached into my inner pocket. My fingers brushed the cold metal of the satellite phone. I wanted to pull it out. I wanted to call Mr. Henderson right then and there. I wanted to kick down the door and scream at them, to tell them that I was the one holding the leash, that I could snap their neck financially with a single signature. But I stopped. I withdrew my hand. The anger that had been burning hot in my chest cooled into something solid and unbreakable like steel. Number. Calling the lawyer now would be mercy. It would end their panic too quickly. They needed to feel the consequences of their choices. They needed to execute their plan, so that when the hammer fell, they would know exactly why they were being crushed. I stepped back from the wall, moving silently across the grass. I forgot my thirst. The adrenaline coursing through my veins was enough to sustain me. I went back to the shed and sat down in the darkness. I did not sleep. I stared at the door, waiting for the sun to rise, waiting for my son to come and throw me away like garbage. I was ready. The game was far from over. It was just entering the next level. The sun had not yet risen when the door to the tool shed was kicked open. The metal rattled against the frame, startling me out of a fitful, shivering sleep. It was Terrence. He was dressed in a silk jogging suit that probably cost more than the car I had bought him for his graduation. He stood in the doorway, holding a flashlight beam directly in my eyes, blinding me. "Get up," he barked. His voice lacked even the pretense of politeness now. "The party is over, Dad. Victoria is awake, and she does not want to see you here when she looks out the window to drink her morning coffee. You have to go." I groaned as I tried to stand. My joints were locked from the cold and the damp concrete. My stomach cramped violently. I had not eaten since the scraps he threw at me the night before. "Terrence," I said, my voice cracking. "I need food. I am lightheaded. Just a piece of toast, please." "We do not have time for breakfast," he snapped, grabbing my arm and hauling me up. "I called you a car. It is waiting at the end of the driveway. I am sending you to Jasmine's. She has more room. She can deal with this." He dragged me out of the shed and down the long, winding driveway. The rain had stopped, but the morning air was biting. At the gate, a beat-up sedan with a cracked windshield was idling. It was the cheapest rideshare option available. The muffler was loud, and the car was rusted around the wheel wells. This was how he was shipping off his father, like a bag of unwanted refuse. Terrence opened the back door and practically shoved me inside. The driver, a young man who looked exhausted, wrinkled his nose as the smell of my damp, dirty clothes filled the small cabin. "Where are we going?" the driver asked, without looking back. "Downtown," Terrence answered for me. "The Carter Real Estate Group building. Just drop him at the front." He slammed the door shut. As the car began to pull away, I watched my son pull out his phone. He dialed a number. Through the thin glass, I could see his lips moving. "Jasmine," he was saying. "I am sending Dad over. He wants to visit you." "Yeah, just a surprise visit. He misses you." "No, I cannot talk right now. Just take care of him." He hung up and turned his back, walking up the driveway toward his mansion without a second glance. He had lied to her. He had not told her I was broke. He had not told her I was homeless. He was dumping me on her doorstep like a prank, letting his sister deal with the shock, so he did not have to face the reality. I leaned my head against the cold window as the car rattled down the highway. My stomach twisted with hunger and betrayal. I closed my eyes and pictured the bank transfer authorization codes I had memorized. I could buy the company Terrence worked for before lunch. I could foreclose on his house by dinner. But not yet. I needed to see Jasmine. I needed to see if my daughter, the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders, had a heart, or if she was just as hollow as her brother. The ride took 40 minutes. The driver dropped me off in the heart of the financial district. I stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the glass and steel skyscraper. On the ground floor, in gold lettering, it read, "Jasmine Carter, Luxury Real Estate." This was her kingdom. I had paid for her license. I had introduced her to her first big clients. I had built the network she now claimed as her own self-made empire. I adjusted my tattered coat, took a deep breath, and pushed through the revolving glass doors. The lobby was a temple of wealth. The floors were white marble. The air smelled of expensive espresso and fresh lilies. Soft classical music played in the background. I walked toward the reception desk. The receptionist, a young woman with a headset, looked up. Her smile vanished the moment she saw me. She reached for the phone, her eyes darting to the security guard standing by the elevators. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her tone icy. "Deliveries are in the back." I am not a delivery man, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. I am here to see Jasmine Carter. I am her father. The receptionist paused, her finger hovering over a button. She looked me up and down, taking in the mud on my boots, the stains on my coat, the unshaven face. She clearly did not believe me. Ms. Carter is in a meeting, she said dismissively. You can leave a message. I did not wait for her permission. I saw movement in the glass conference room to my right. It was Jasmine. She was standing by a large architectural model, pointing at something while a man in a bespoke suit nodded. He was a VIP client. I recognized him from the business pages. He was a tech investor looking for penthouses. I walked past the reception desk. Sir, you cannot go in there, the receptionist shouted, signaling the guard. I pushed open the glass door of the conference room. Jasmine turned around, a bright, professional smile plastered on her face. When she saw me, the smile didn't just fade, it shattered. Her eyes went wide with horror. She dropped the laser pointer she was holding. Dad, she whispered, her voice barely audible. The investor turned to look at me. He frowned, stepping back as the smell of the tool shed entered the sterile room. Jasmine, I said, stepping forward. My arms were open, offering a hug I knew she would not want. Terrence sent me. I need help, sweetie. I have lost everything. Jasmine's face turned a violent shade of purple. She looked at the client, then at me, then at the security guard who was now rushing through the door. She made a decision in a split second. She decided that her sale was worth more than her father. I do not know who this man is, she said, her voice high and tight. She looked at the security guard. Please remove him. He is disturbing my client. I froze. She was denying me. She was looking me in the eye and pretending I was a stranger. Jasmine, I said, my voice rising, I am your father, Winston. I paid for this office. Do not do this. Security, she shrieked, stepping back as if I were attacking her. Get him out of here. The guard, a large man with a grip like iron, grabbed my shoulder. He spun me around. Come on, old-timer, he grunted. Let's go before I call the cops. I looked back at her. Jasmine was apologizing to the client, laughing a nervous, fake laugh, smoothing her skirt. She was erasing me. I am not leaving until you talk to me, I shouted, resisting the guard. Jasmine, look at me. She turned her back on me. The guard dragged me out of the conference room, across the marble lobby, and shoved me through the revolving doors. I stumbled onto the sidewalk, nearly falling into a passerby. The humiliation was total. People on the street stared. They saw a crazy old man getting kicked out of a luxury building. They didn't see a father whose heart had just been ripped out by the daughter he adored. I stood there, panting, my chest heaving. I wasn't going to leave, not like this. I walked around the corner to the employee entrance in the alleyway. I knew she would come out eventually. I knew she would want to make sure I was gone. I waited by the dumpsters. The smell of rotting garbage and stale grease was overwhelming, but it matched how I felt inside. 20 minutes later, the back door opened. Jasmine stepped out. She wasn't alone. Hunter, her husband, was with her. Hunter was a corporate lawyer, a man who smiled with his teeth but never his eyes. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first car. They saw me leaning against the brick wall. Jasmine looked around frantically to make sure no one else was watching. Then she marched toward me, her heels clicking on the dirty pavement. "Are you insane?" she hissed, her face contorted with rage. "You just cost me a $6 million commission. Do you have any idea who that was? That was Simon Vance. If he thinks I am related to a crazy homeless person, he will take his business elsewhere." "I am not crazy, Jasmine," I said, leaning against the wall for support. "I am broke. I told you. I lost the money. I have nowhere to go. Terrence kicked me out. I thought you would help me." Hunter stepped forward, positioning himself between me and his wife. He towered over me, using his height to intimidate. He looked at me with a sneer of absolute contempt. "Help you?" Hunter laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Why would we help you? You are a liability, Winston. You are a washed-up old man who clearly lost his marbles along with his money. We heard the rumors. People said you were making bad deals. We just didn't know it was this bad." "So that is it?" I asked, looking from Hunter to Jasmine. "I am broke, so I am nothing to you? I am not your father anymore?" "You are an embarrassment," Jasmine spat out. "Look at you. You are filthy. You smell. You come into my place of business and make a scene. That is not what a father does. A father provides. A father protects his children's legacy. You are destroying ours. I provides for you for 35 years, I said quietly. I bought your first car. I paid for your college. I paid for your wedding. And you lost it all, Hunter interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. That is the point, Winston. You had it and you blew it. That makes you a failure. And we don't associate with failures. It is bad for the brand. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek leather wallet. He flipped it open and pulled out a crisp $50 bill. He crumpled it in his fist and threw it at me. It didn't land in my hand. It landed in a puddle of dirty rainwater and oil at my feet. There, Hunter said, dusting off his hands as if he had touched something infectious. There is $50. That is more than you deserve. Take it. Go find a bus station. Go to another city. Go anywhere but here. Do not come back to the office. Do not come to our house. If you do, I will file a restraining order. I will have you arrested for harassment. Do you understand me? I looked down at the money soaking in the filth. It was the ultimate insult. $50 for a lifetime of love. $50 to erase a father. Jasmine, I said, looking at her one last time. Is this what you want? She crossed her arms and looked away, staring at the brick wall. Just go, Dad. You are ruining my life. I nodded slowly. The coldness inside me was spreading, freezing the last bits of hope I had held on to. I did not bend down. I did not pick up the money. I stepped over the $50 bill, my boots splashing in the puddle. I understand, I said. I will not bother you again. I walked down the alleyway, away from the luxury tower, away from my daughter and her husband. I didn't look back. I heard the metal door slam shut behind them. They were gone, back to their air-conditioned world of deals and lies. I was alone on the street. My stomach cramped again, a sharp reminder of my hunger. I had no phone to call a car, not the one I was pretending to have lost. I had only the satellite phone hidden in my lining, and I wasn't ready to use it. I had one more stop, one more child, my youngest, Jordan. Jordan was different. He didn't care about business. He didn't care about image. He was a teacher at a public school in the poorest district of the city. He lived in a neighborhood that Terrence and Jasmine wouldn't drive through, even if their lives depended on it. I hadn't spoken to Jordan in months, not because I didn't want to, but because Terrence and Jasmine had convinced me that Jordan was a failure. They told me he was wasting his potential. They told me he was ungrateful because he refused to work for the family company. I had let them poison me against him. I had let my pride create a distance between us. Now, he was my last hope. I walked for hours. I walked until the skyscrapers gave way to old brick buildings and cracked sidewalks. I walked until the suits and ties were replaced by work boots and hoodies. The sun began to set, casting long shadows over the city. I was exhausted. My legs felt like lead, but I kept moving. I had to know. I had to know if I had failed completely as a father, or if there was one seed I had planted that had grown into something good. I reached the tenement building where Jordan lived. It was a 4-story walk-up with peeling paint and bars on the windows. There was no doorman here. There was no marble lobby. Just a broken buzzer system and the smell of cooking onions wafting from the open windows. I stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the 4th floor. A light was on. I took a deep breath, adjusted my grip on my trash bag, and pushed the buzzer for apartment 4B. I didn't know what I would find up there. I didn't know if he would even open the door. But after the mansion and the office tower, after the tool shed and the alleyway, this crumbling building felt like the most important place in the world. I waited for the buzz to let me in, praying that this time the door wouldn't be slammed in my face. The walk from the financial district to the neighborhood where my youngest son lived was a journey across 2 different worlds. I left behind the scent of expensive espresso and freshly printed money, and entered a world that smelled of exhaust fumes, damp concrete, and desperation. The sidewalks here were cracked and uneven, pushing up against the soles of my boots like jagged teeth. I walked for hours. My 68-year-old knees burned with every step, a sharp reminder that I was no longer the young man who had built an empire from nothing. As the sun began to set, the shadows stretched long and thin across the peeling brick facades of the tenement buildings. This was the part of the city I had tried to forget, This was the part of the city I had worked 18-hour days to escape. And yet, here I was, returning to it not as a conqueror, but as a beggar. I clutched my black trash bag tighter. It was the only thing I had to hold on to. Jordan lived on the 4th floor of a walk-up that had seen better days decades ago. The front door of the building was propped open with a brick because the lock was broken. The hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and old cigarettes. There was no elevator here, no doorman to sneer at me, just a steep, narrow staircase that seemed to climb endlessly into the gloom. I started the ascent. 1 step, 2 steps. My breath came in ragged gasps. I had to stop on the second landing, leaning against the graffiti-stained wall to steady my racing heart. I thought about Terrence's mansion with its heated floors. I thought about Jasmine's office with its panoramic views. They had space, they had light, they had air. Here, the air felt heavy, recycled, thick with the struggles of the people living behind these thin doors. By the time I reached the 4th floor, I was drenched in sweat despite the chill. I stood before apartment 4B. The paint on the door was chipped, revealing layers of blue and green beneath the beige. I raised my hand to knock, and for a moment, I hesitated. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through my exhaustion. What if he was like them? What if the poverty had made him bitter? What if he looked at me and saw only another mouth to feed in a house that already had too little? I knocked. The sound was hollow against the wood. I waited. I heard footsteps inside. Light, quick footsteps. The door opened. It wasn't Jordan. It was Emily, his wife. She was a small woman with tired eyes and hair pulled back in a messy bun. She was wearing scrubs that looked worn at the seams. I knew she worked double shifts as a nurse, just to keep the lights on. I had never really spoken to her. At family gatherings, I had ignored her, focusing on Victoria and Hunter, the impressive in-laws. I had judged her for her lack of pedigree. She looked at me. She didn't blink. She didn't recoil. Her eyes went wide, not with disgust, but with genuine shock. "Mr. Carter," she gasped. She didn't look at the mud on my boots. She didn't look at the trash bag. She looked at my face. She saw the shivering. She saw the pallor of my skin. "Jordan," she screamed, turning her head back toward the small apartment. "Jordan, come quick. It is your father." She didn't wait for him. She reached out, her small hands grabbing my wet, dirty coat, and she pulled me inside. Come in, please, you are freezing," she said, her voice laced with a frantic kindness that I had not heard in years. I stepped into the apartment. It was tiny. The living room and the kitchen were one small space. The furniture was mismatched, clearly salvaged from thrift stores. But it was warm. It smelled of soup and soap. Then I saw him. Jordan came running from the back room, a stack of papers in his hand. He was wearing a t-shirt with a hole in the shoulder and sweatpants. He looked tired. He looked older than his 30 years. But when he saw me standing there, dripping onto his linoleum floor, his face didn't twist in anger. It crumbled in concern. "Dad," he choked out. He dropped the papers. They scattered across the floor, unheeded. He crossed the room in 2 strides and wrapped his arms around me. He hugged me tight. He didn't care that I was wet. He didn't care that I smelled of the streets. He held me as if I were something precious that he thought he had lost. I stiffened at first, unaccustomed to such raw affection. Terrence and Jasmine hugged with air kisses and stiff backs. Jordan hugged with his soul. I felt his heart beating against my chest, steady and strong. "What happened, Dad?" Jordan asked, pulling back just enough to look at me. His hands gripped my shoulders, steadying me. "Why are you here? Why are you dressed like this? Are you hurt?" I looked at him. I looked at Emily, who had already run to the kitchen and was pouring a glass of water. There was no judgment in this room. There was only fear for my safety. "I lost it all, Jordan," I said, my voice breaking. The lie tasted different here. With Terrence and Jasmine, it had felt like a trap I was setting. Here, it felt like a confession of failure. I was scammed. The company, the house, the accounts, everything is gone. I have nothing left but this bag. Terrence kicked me out. Jasmine, she wouldn't even talk to me. I have nowhere to go. The silence that followed was short. I waited for the sigh. I waited for the look of burden to cross their faces. I waited for them to ask how they were supposed to feed another person when they barely had enough for themselves. Instead, Jordan tightened his grip on my shoulders. He looked me dead in the eye. "You have somewhere to go," he said firmly. "You are here. This is your home, Dad." "But I am broke," I whispered. "I can't help you. I have nothing to give you." "I don't care about your money," Jordan said, his voice fierce. "I never cared about your money. You are my father. That is all that matters." Emily came over with the water and a towel. She gently began to dry my face. "We don't have much, Mr. Carter," she said softly. "It is not like your big house. But we have heat and we have food. You will not be on the street, not while we have a roof." She guided me to the small, worn sofa. I sat down, my legs finally giving out. I looked around the room. I saw the stack of bills on the small kitchen counter. I saw the way Jordan glanced at the empty refrigerator before looking back at me with a reassuring smile. I saw the reality of their life. They were struggling. They were drowning. And yet, they had just thrown me a life raft without hesitation. Jordan sat next to me. "Dad, you are going to take the bedroom," he said. I looked up, startled. "No, Jordan, I can't do that. That is your room." "It is the only bed we have," Jordan said, cutting off my protest. "It has the best mattress. It is warm. You need rest. You look exhausted." Emily and we actually prefer the living room. It is cooler out here. We can set up a pallet on the floor. It is like camping. We do it all the time. I looked at him. I knew he was lying. I looked at the sofa I was sitting on. I could feel the broken springs digging into my hip, even through my coat. There was no way they preferred sleeping on the floor. There was no way this was convenient for them. They were giving me their sanctuary. They were giving me their comfort. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Of course," Emily said, smiling as she pulled a blanket from a closet. "You are the guest of honor. The master of the house always gets the best room. That is the rule. The master of the house." In Terrence's mansion, I was a stain on the rug. In Jasmine's office, I was a liability to the brand. Here, in this crumbling apartment with peeling paint and drafty windows, I was the master of the house. Jordan stood up and went to the bedroom. I watched him through the open door. He was stripping the bed, putting on fresh sheets. I saw him take his own pillow, fluff it, and place it perfectly in the center. He moved with a reverence that made my chest ache. He came back out. "It is ready, Dad," he said. "Go get some sleep. We will figure everything out in the morning. Do not worry about a thing. As long as I am standing, you are safe." I stood up. I walked toward the bedroom. I paused at the door and looked back at them. Jordan was holding Emily's hand. They looked tired. They looked worried. But they were standing together, a united front against the disaster I had brought into their lives. "Thank you," I whispered. I went into the room and closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed. It was a simple double bed, with a quilt that had been patched in several places. I lay down. The sheets smelled of lavender detergent, cheap but clean. I curled up, pulling the quilt to my chin. Outside the door, I heard them whispering. "What are we going to do, Jordan?" Emily asked, her voice low. "We barely have enough for rent this month. How are we going to feed 3 people?" "We will figure it out," Jordan replied. "I will pick up extra tutoring shifts. Maybe I can sell the bike." "You need the bike to get to work," Emily said. "I can walk," Jordan said. "It doesn't matter. He is my dad, Em. He took care of me. Now it is my turn." I buried my face in the pillow to stifle the sob that ripped through my throat. I had spent years thinking Jordan was the failure. I had spent years thinking he lacked ambition because he didn't want to conquer the corporate world. I had been so wrong. He didn't lack ambition. He possessed humanity. I touched the pocket of my coat, which I had hung on the back of the door. The satellite phone was there. The black card with the unlimited limit was hidden in the lining. I could end their struggle right now. I could walk out there and tell them I was a multimillionaire. I could buy this entire building and gift it to them. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed to know the full extent of their heart. I needed to know how far they would go for a father who had nothing to offer. And I needed to know what the wolves, Terrence and Jasmine, would do when they found out where the sheep was hiding. The test wasn't over. It was just getting harder. And the hardest part was watching my son suffer to save me, while I held the power to save him in my pocket. The morning sun filtered through the thin, taped-up curtains of the bedroom, casting a pale, dusty light across the floor. I had not slept well. The mattress Jordan insisted was the best in the house was lumpy, and the springs sang a screeching melody every time I shifted my weight. But it wasn't the bed that kept me awake. It was the guilt. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed down on me harder than the cold of the previous night. I lay there, listening to the sounds of the apartment waking up. The walls were paper thin. I could hear the neighbor coughing next door. I could hear the hiss of the radiator trying and failing to push heat into the room. I heard footsteps in the kitchen. Soft, careful steps. It was Emily. I threw off the quilt and crept toward the door, leaving it cracked just an inch so I could see out. I needed to see how they lived when they thought no one was watching. Emily was standing in front of the open refrigerator. The light from the appliance illuminated her tired face. She stared into it for a long time, as if hoping that by sheer force of will, food would materialize on the wire racks. But the fridge was barren. There was a jug of water, a half-empty carton of milk that looked past its expiration date, and a single small brown egg sitting in the door tray. Just one egg. I watched as she took it out. She handled it delicately, like it was a diamond. She filled a small pot with water and placed it on the stove. While the water boiled, she opened the cupboard. It was just as empty as the fridge. There were a few cans of beans and a box of saltines. That was it. When the egg was boiled, she took it to the counter. She peeled it, blowing on her fingers as the steam rose. Then, she took a knife and sliced it perfectly down the middle. She put one half on a small plate with 2 saltine crackers. She put the other half in a plastic container, the kind used for work lunches. Jordan walked into the kitchen then. He was dressed for work in a button-down shirt that was clean but frayed at the collar. He looked exhausted, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Good morning, Em," he whispered, kissing her on the forehead. "Morning," she said, forcing a smile. "I made breakfast." She pushed the plate with the half-egg toward him. Jordan frowned, looking at the plate and then at the counter. "Where is yours?" he asked. "I already ate," she lied. Her voice was smooth, practiced. "I had the last of the oatmeal. I wanted you to have the protein. You have a long day today." Jordan looked at her. He knew she was lying. I could see it in his eyes. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the plate. "Em, you need to eat," he said softly. "You were on your feet for 12 hours. "I am fine," she insisted, pushing the plate closer to his hand. "Please, Jordan, eat it. For me. And take the other half for lunch." "What about Dad?" Jordan asked, looking toward my door. "I will make him some soup from the beans later," Emily said. "He needs something soft. Do not worry about us. Just eat." Jordan sighed, a sound of deep, resigned fatigue. He picked up the half-egg and ate it in 2 bites. He ate it like a starving man, desperate for the energy. I watched from the crack in the door, and I felt tears prick my eyes. I clamped my hand over my mouth to stifle a sob. I had spent decades dining in 5-star restaurants. I had thrown away steaks that cost more than their monthly rent because they were slightly overcooked. I had let Terrence order bottles of wine that cost thousands just to impress his friends. And here was my youngest son and his wife, splitting a single egg because they had nothing else. I had neglected him. I had bought into the lie that he was fine, that he chose this struggle. I had let Terrence and Jasmine convince me that Jordan was just lazy or unmotivated. But he wasn't lazy. He was drowning. And while I was handing out millions to his siblings, I hadn't even bothered to check if his refrigerator had food in it. I retreated back to the bed and sat down, burying my face in my hands. The shame was hotter than any fire. I pretended to be asleep when Jordan came in to check on me before he left, but my pillow was wet with tears I could not hide. 2 hours later, the silence of the apartment was shattered by a violent pounding on the front door. It wasn't a knock, it was a demand. It sounded like someone was trying to break the wood with their fists. I was sitting in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, pretending to read an old newspaper I found. Emily was in the kitchen, trying to stretch a can of beans into a meal. She froze when the pounding started. Her face went pale. She wiped her hands on a rag and looked at the door with terrified eyes. "I know that knock," she whispered. "It is Mr. Russo." She went to the door and opened it just a crack, leaving the security chain on. Through the gap, I saw a large man with a thick neck and a face red with anger. He was wearing a leather jacket that looked expensive, a stark contrast to the peeling paint of the hallway. "Open the door, Emily," he barked. "I know you are in there." "Mr. Russo, please," Emily said, her voice trembling. "Jordan is at work. He gets paid on Friday. We will have the money then, I promise." "I am tired of promises," Russo shouted, spitting as he spoke. You are 2 months behind. 2 months! I have people lined up for this apartment. People who actually have jobs. People who pay. He kicked the door. The wood groaned and the chain rattled. Open it, or I am calling the sheriff right now to drag your stuff out to the curb. Emily's hands shook as she undid the chain. She opened the door. Russo stepped in, filling the small room with his imposing presence. He looked around the apartment with a sneer, his eyes landing on the stack of unpaid bills on the counter, the mismatched furniture, and finally, on me. He stopped. He pointed a thick finger at me. "Who is this?" he demanded. "That is Jordan's father," Emily said, stepping between us as if to shield me. "He is staying with us for a while." "Staying with you?" Russo laughed, a cruel barking sound. "You cannot even pay for yourselves, and you are moving people in. Is he on the lease?" "No." "Does he have a job?" "Look at him. He looks like he crawled out of a dumpster." I gripped the arms of the chair. My knuckles turned white. The urge to stand up, to pull out the black Amex card hidden in the lining of my coat, was overwhelming. I could buy this building. I could buy this man's entire portfolio and evict him from his own life. The anger boiled in my veins, a hot, toxic sludge. How dare he speak to me like that? How dare he speak to Emily like that? Rousseau stepped closer to me. He loomed over the chair. I could smell stale cigar smoke and cheap cologne on him. "Listen to me, old man," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "This is not a charity ward. If you are living here, you pay. If you don't have money, you get out. I am not running a shelter for strays." "Mr. Russo, please stop," Emily begged, grabbing his arm. "He lost everything. He has nowhere to go. Please have some heart." "Heart does not pay the mortgage, sweetheart," Russo snapped, shaking her off. "You have until Friday at noon. If I do not have the full $2,000 plus the late fees, you are all out. You, the teacher, and the stray dog here. And do not think about hiding. I will change the locks myself." He turned and marched out, slamming the door so hard that a picture frame fell off the wall and shattered on the floor. Emily stood there, staring at the closed door. Her shoulders shook. She didn't make a sound, but I saw her back heaving as she cried. She bent down and started picking up the broken glass. "I am sorry, Mr. Carter," she whispered, not looking at me. "I am so sorry you had to see that." I stood up. My legs felt stronger now, fueled by the rage. "Emily," I said, "you do not have to apologize. That man is a monster." "We will figure it out," she said, her voice thick with tears. "Jordan will figure it out. He always does." I walked over to the window and looked out at the gray street below. I touched my pocket. The satellite phone. The lawyer. It would be so easy. I could end this right now. I could save them. But if I did, if I revealed myself now, I would never know the full extent of their sacrifice. I needed to see what Jordan would do when pushed to the edge. I needed to see if he would choose his father or his survival. It was a cruel test, I knew that. But after the betrayal of his siblings, I needed to be certain. I needed to know that this love was real, that it wasn't just fair-weather kindness. I waited for the evening. The day passed in a slow, agonizing blur. Emily went to her shift at the hospital, leaving me a bowl of the bean soup. It was watery and bland, but I ate every drop. At 6 o'clock, the key turned in the lock. Jordan walked in. He looked even more exhausted than he had in the morning. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes red-rimmed. He was carrying a small white paper bag from a pharmacy. He didn't have groceries. He didn't have bags of food. He walked over to me. He forced a smile, but it looked painful on his face. "Hey, Dad," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Still coughing. A little," I said. He sat down on the coffee table in front of me and opened the bag. He pulled out a bottle of cough syrup. It wasn't the generic brand. It was the name brand. The one with the fancy label that promised instant relief. I knew how much it cost. It was at least $20. $20 they didn't have. $20 that could have bought eggs, milk, bread. "Here," he said, pouring a dose into the little plastic cup. "Take this. It will help you sleep. The pharmacist said it is the best one for chest congestion." I looked at the cup. The liquid was thick and red. I looked at Jordan. "Jordan," I said softly, "this is expensive. You shouldn't have." "You needed it," he said simply. "You were coughing all night, Dad. I couldn't let you suffer." "But what about dinner?" I asked. "What about the rent?" "Do not worry about the rent," he said, his eyes shifting away from mine. "I talked to some people. I am picking up extra hours. It will be fine. And for dinner, Emily made soup. It is good soup." He stood up and went to the kitchen. He poured himself a bowl of the watery beans. He poured one for Emily, who had just come home, and another small bowl for me. We sat around the small, wobbly table. The soup was barely enough to cover the bottom of the bowls. There was no bread to dip in it. There was no meat. It was poverty in a bowl. But then, something happened. Jordan started telling a story about one of his students, a little boy who had drawn a picture of George Washington with a mohawk. He did an impression of the principal's reaction. Emily laughed. It was a genuine, bell-like sound that filled the room. Jordan laughed too, his eyes crinkling at the corners. They dragged me into it. They asked me about my day, about the newspaper articles I had read. We talked. We laughed. For an hour, the cold apartment felt warm. The fear of the landlord, the hunger in our bellies, the looming eviction, it all faded into the background. I looked at them. They were eating water and beans, and they were happy. They were happy because they were together. They were happy because they had integrity. I thought about the dinner at Terrence's house, the expensive steaks, the vintage wine, the tension that made your neck ache. I thought about Jasmine's office, the smell of money and the coldness of her heart. They had everything, and they had nothing. Jordan and Emily had nothing, and they had everything. I took the medicine Jordan had bought. It tasted like cherries and sacrifice. I swallowed it, and it felt like liquid gold going down my throat. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, I felt rich. Not because of my bank account, but because I had created this. I had raised this man. And even though I had neglected him, even though I had failed him, he had somehow remained good. But the test wasn't over. The landlord was coming on Friday. The clock was ticking. And I knew, with a sinking feeling in my gut, that Jordan was running out of options. I watched him twist the simple gold wedding band on his finger, a nervous habit he had developed. I saw him looking at it, calculating its value, and I knew what was coming next. The thought broke my heart, but I had to let it happen. I had to let him go to the edge so I could catch him before he fell. The darkness of the apartment was not peaceful. It was heavy and suffocating. I lay in the bed Jordan had given me, staring at the cracks in the ceiling that were barely visible in the moonlight filtering through the window. The cough syrup Jordan had bought with his last dollars had soothed my chest, but it had done nothing to quiet the storm in my mind. I closed my eyes, trying to force myself to sleep, but the sound of voices from the kitchen drifted under the door. It was a low, urgent whispering, the sound of people who are running out of options and running out of time. I shifted quietly, throwing off the thin quilt and creeping toward the door. I pressed my ear against the painted wood, holding my breath. "We have $12, Jordan," Emily whispered, her voice tight with panic. "That is it, $12 until next Friday. The cough medicine cost $22. We are negative in the account, Jordan. The bank already charged us an overdraft fee." I heard the sound of a chair scraping against the floor as Jordan sat down. I imagined him burying his face in his hands, running his fingers through his hair. "I know, Em," Jordan replied, his voice exhausted. "I know. I thought I could pick up a shift at the warehouse tonight, but they said they are full. The principal said the tutoring checks will not clear for another 2 weeks. We have no food, Jordan," Emily said. "We have half a bag of rice and maybe 2 cans of beans. That is not enough for 3 people for a week. Your father needs protein. He is weak. He looked so pale today. If he gets sick again, we cannot afford a doctor. We definitely cannot afford a hospital." I leaned my forehead against the door frame. The guilt was a physical pain in my gut, sharper than hunger. I was the reason they were broke. I was the reason they were counting pennies on the kitchen table. I had eaten their food. I had taken their medicine. I was a parasite feeding on the only people who had shown me kindness. "There has to be something we can sell," Jordan said. "What about the microwave?" "We sold the microwave last month when the car broke down," Emily reminded him gently. "Right," Jordan sighed. "The toaster. It is broken. Remember, it sparks every time we plug it in. The pawn shop will not take it." "My laptop," Jordan suggested. "I can sell the laptop. I can use the computers at the library for my lesson plans." "You need that for grading," Emily said. "And the screen is cracked. They will not give you more than $50 for it. That will buy groceries for a few days. but it will not pay the rent. Mr. Russo said, "Noon on Friday, Jordan. If we do not have the 2,000, he is putting us out." Silence fell over the kitchen. It was a heavy, terrified silence. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the one that held nothing but a jug of water. I could hear the wind rattling the window pane. I wanted to burst through the door. I wanted to scream that I had millions. I wanted to tell them that I could buy this whole city block. But I remained frozen. I was paralyzed by a morbid curiosity and a desperate need to know the depth of their loyalty. I needed to know what they would do when the walls truly closed in. "There is nothing left, Em," Jordan whispered finally. "We have sold everything of value. The TV, the guitar, your grandmother's china. We stripped this place bare just to keep the lights on. Maybe I can ask for an advance at the hospital," Emily suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. "You already did," Jordan said. "They said no." "Then what do we do?" Emily asked, her voice breaking. "Do we tell him? Do we tell your dad we can't help him? Do we send him to a shelter?" "No," Jordan said instantly, his voice rising slightly before he shushed himself. "No, we do not send him away. He is my father. He took care of me when I was helpless. I am not turning him out onto the street, not while I have breath in my body." "Then how do we feed him, Jordan? How do we keep a roof over his head?" I heard the sound of Jordan standing up and pacing the small kitchen. 3 steps one way, 3 steps back, the sound of a trapped animal. "We will find a way," he said. "We always do." But this time I could hear the doubt in his voice. He didn't know how. He was out of moves. He was a good man trapped in a broken system, and now he had the weight of a deadbeat father on his back. I stepped back from the door, my hand over my heart. I had pushed them too far. I had let this test go on too long. They were breaking, and it was my fault. I was about to reach for the door handle to end it all when I heard a different sound. It was a small, metallic clink, like a coin dropping onto a table, or a ring. I leaned back in. "Jordan, what are you doing?" Emily asked, her voice soft and trembling. I heard Jordan take a deep breath. I twisted the simple gold band on my own finger, feeling the cold metal. I knew what he was doing. "It is gold, Em," Jordan said. "It is 14 karat. I remember when I bought it. The jeweler said it was solid. It weighs something." "Jordan, no," Emily whispered. "Not your ring." "It is just a thing, Em," Jordan said, his voice thick with emotion. "It is just a piece of metal. It does not mean I love you less. It does not undo our vows. But it is worth money. Maybe $200. Maybe 300 if gold is up. That buys groceries. That buys time with Russo." I pressed my eye to the crack in the door. I could see them now. They were sitting at the small, wobbly table. The single overhead bulb cast a harsh yellow light on their faces. Jordan had taken off his wedding ring. He was holding it between his thumb and forefinger, staring at it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. It was a simple band, scratched and worn from years of teaching and working, but it shone under the light. "You love that ring," Emily said, tears streaming down her face. "You never take it off, not even when you shower." "I love you," Jordan said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I love the promise it represents. But a promise doesn't feed my father. A promise doesn't keep the heat on." He looked at her with such intensity, such desperate love, that I had to look away for a second. "We can buy another one," he said, trying to smile. "When things get better, we will buy a better one with diamonds." "I don't want a better one," Emily sobbed. "I want that one." "I know," Jordan said. "I know, baby." He placed the ring on the table. It sat there, a small golden circle of sacrifice. Then Emily did something that made my knees buckle. She reached up and slowly twisted her own ring off her finger. It was a small, modest ring with a tiny chip of a diamond, the best Jordan could afford when he proposed. She placed it on the table next to his. "If you are selling yours, I am selling mine," she said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "We are in this together, Jordan." "Em, you don't have to," Jordan started. "Yes, I do," she said firmly. "Yours alone won't be enough for the rent. Together, maybe we can get close enough to make Russo wait another week." Jordan stared at the 2 rings sitting side by side on the scarred laminate table. He covered his face with his hands, and his shoulders shook. He was crying. silent, racking sobs of a man who feels he has failed to provide for the people he loves. "I am sorry, Em," he whispered. "I am so sorry. I should be able to take care of us. I should be able to take care of him." "You are taking care of us," Emily said, standing up and wrapping her arms around his neck. "You are doing the hardest thing anyone can do. You are sacrificing your pride for your family. That is what a real man does." They held each other in the dim kitchen, clinging to one another like survivors on a life raft. The 2 gold rings sat on the table between them, glimmering in the low light, symbols of a love that was worth more than all the assets in my portfolio combined. "Dad is more important than jewelry," Emily whispered into his hair. "He is flesh and blood. Metal can be replaced. He cannot." I backed away from the door, my breath catching in my throat. I stumbled to the bed and sat down heavily. The image of those 2 rings on the table was burned into my retinas. They were willing to sell the symbols of their marriage to feed me. They were willing to strip themselves of their most sentimental possessions to keep a roof over the head of an old man they thought was a failure. Tears, hot and fast, flowed down my face. I had come here to test them, but I had been the one tested, and I had been found wanting. I was a man who measured worth in stocks and bonds, in property and leverage. Jordan and Emily measured worth in sacrifice and love. They were the richest people I knew, and I was the pauper. I stood up. The sorrow in my chest hardened into a cold, steely resolve. The test was over. The time for observation was done. Now it was time for action. It was time for judgment. I walked over to the closet where my tattered coat hung. I reached into the hidden lining and pulled out the satellite phone. It felt heavy in my hand, a weapon of mass destruction in the world of finance. I turned it on. The screen glowed blue in the darkness of the bedroom. I scrolled through the contacts until I found the name I needed. Henderson, my personal attorney, the man who held the keys to my empire. I typed a message, my thumbs flying across the keypad. The anger I felt toward Terrence and Jasmine, toward the landlord Russo, toward the world that had beaten my son down, channeled into every keystroke. "Code red," I typed. "Activate Plan B immediately. I need full liquidity. I need the acquisition papers for the bank holding Terrence's mortgage. I need the ownership transfer for the real estate firm Jasmine works for. And I need you to purchase the building at 452 East 9th Street. Cash offer. Double the market value if you have to, but get it done by morning. Also prepare a cashier's check, $60 million. I paused for a second looking at the phone. Then I added one more line. "Bring the car, the big one, and bring security. We are going to war." I hit send. The message swooshed away into the ether, carrying with it the power to rearrange lives. I put the phone back in my pocket. I looked at the closed bedroom door. Behind it, my son and his wife were sleeping, holding each other in fear of the morning. They didn't know that the morning would bring a storm, but not the kind they feared. It would bring a storm that would wash away their debts, their fears, and their enemies. I wiped my face. I lay back down on the lumpy mattress, but this time, I didn't feel the springs. I felt the hum of the engine starting. I felt the gears of my empire turning. Tomorrow, I would no longer be Winston the homeless father. Tomorrow, I would be Winston Carter, the Titan. And God help anyone who stood in my way. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in days, I slept. I slept the sleep of a general on the eve of a battle he knows he is going to win. The morning sun was trying its best to push through the grime of the city, but inside the apartment, the air felt lighter than it had in days. There was no food in the fridge and the rent was still due, but the decision to sell the rings had brought a strange sort of calm to Jordan and Emily. They had made their choice. They had chosen love over security. I was sitting by the window, mending a tear in my shirt with a needle and thread Emily had found, when the atmosphere on the street below shifted. Usually the sounds of the neighborhood were predictable. The screech of a city bus, the shouting of kids playing stickball, the heavy bass of a passing car stereo. But this sound was different. It was the low purr of high-performance engines. Not one, but two. I looked out the window, and my heart hammered against my ribs. It was a sight so incongruous, it looked like a movie set. A sleek black Porsche Cayenne and a pearl-white Range Rover were gliding slowly down the potholed street, avoiding piles of trash and broken glass, like royalty stepping over puddles. They pulled up right in front of our crumbling building, double parking next to a rusted pickup truck. The neighborhood stopped. People on the stoop stood up. The kids stopped playing. Everyone stared at the alien machines that cost more than this entire block combined. I knew those cars. I had paid for the down payment on the Porsche. I had signed the lease guarantee for the Range Rover. It was Terrence and Jasmine. They stepped out of their vehicles, and the contrast was visceral. Terrence was wearing a charcoal gray suit that was tailored to within an inch of its life, and sunglasses that hid his eyes. Jasmine stepped out of the Range Rover, wearing cream-colored stilettos and a beige trench coat wrapping it tight around herself, as if the very air of the neighborhood might infect her. They looked up at the building, scanning the windows with expressions of pure disgust. They weren't here to visit. They weren't here to bring groceries or offer help. They were here because they had found me. I pulled back from the window, my breath catching in my throat. How did they know? Had someone seen me? Had they tracked me down? Panic surged through me, not for myself, but for Jordan. He was at school, teaching. Emily was sleeping after her night shift. I was the only one awake. I heard the heavy front door of the building slam downstairs. I heard the click of heels on the stairs, echoing loudly in the quiet hallway. They were coming up. They were coming for me. I stood up looking for a place to hide, but there was nowhere to go in the tiny apartment. I was trapped. I heard them on the landing. They didn't knock. They didn't buzz. They pounded on the door with the entitlement of people who believe they own the world. "Open up!" Jordan Terrence's voice boomed through the thin wood. "We know you are in there. Open this door before I kick it down." The bedroom door opened, and Emily stumbled out, her eyes wide with sleep and fear. "Who is that?" she whispered, clutching her robe. "It is them," I said, my voice grim. "It is the wolves." Before she could answer, the door handle turned. It was locked, but the wood frame was rot. Terrence threw his weight against it, and with a sickening crack, the door flew open, bouncing off the wall. They stood there, filling the doorway with their expensive clothes and their rage. Terrence looked at me, then at Emily, then around the small, shabby room. His lip curled. "God, it smells like boiled cabbage and failure in here," Jasmine said, stepping in behind him and covering her nose with a silk handkerchief. "How can you live like this? It is disgusting." "What are you doing here?" Emily asked, stepping forward, her voice trembling but brave. "You cannot just break into our home." "Home?" Terrence scoffed, kicking a pile of mail that had fallen on the floor. "This isn't a home. It is a kennel. And we are here because of him." He pointed a finger at me. "You old fool," he spat. "Do you have any idea the panic you caused? We have been looking for you for 2 days. Not because we care, but because people are talking. One of my associates saw a bum who looked exactly like Winston Carter wandering into this dump. Do you know how embarrassing that is?" I stood tall, meeting his gaze. "I am not a bum, Terrence. I am your father, and I came here because Jordan was the only one who opened his door." "Jordan is an idiot," Terrence snapped, stepping closer to me, invading my personal space. "He always has been. He likes to play the martyr, taking in strays, saving the world on a teacher's salary. It is pathetic." Jasmine walked around the room, touching things with the tip of her manicured finger and then wiping it off. She looked at the empty shelves, the peeling wallpaper. "Look at this place, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Is this really better than the tool shed? Is this what you prefer? Living in filth with the loser of the family? You are damaging our brand, Dad. People think we abandoned you. You need to disappear properly, not hide out in the slums where anyone can see you." "I did not abandon him," a voice rang out from the hallway. We all turned. Jordan was standing in the doorway. He had come home for his lunch break, likely to check on me. He was breathless, his tie crooked, his face flushed. He looked from the broken door to his siblings standing in his living room. "Get out," Jordan said. His voice was low, but it vibrated with a glorious anger I had never heard from him before. "Get out of my house." "Oh, look, the savior has arrived." Terrence laughed, mocking him. "We are not going anywhere, little brother, not until we settle this. You think you are a hero keeping him here? You are just prolonging the inevitable. Look at him. He is a burden, Jordan, a leech. He sucked us dry, and now he is going to suck you dry too." "He is not a burden," Jordan said, walking into the room and positioning himself between me and Terrence. "He is family, something you two clearly forgot." "Do not lecture me about family," Jasmine snapped. "You have no idea what it takes to maintain a legacy. You are happy playing teacher in your little poverty box while we do the real work. And now you are dragging Dad into your mess. If clients find out he is living here, it makes us look incompetent. So help him, Jordan shouted. If you are so worried about your image, write a check. Help him get an apartment. Buy him food. But you won't do that, will you? Because you are greedy, selfish monsters. Terrence's face turned a dangerous shade of red. He stepped up to Jordan, chest to chest. Jordan was smaller, thinner, but he didn't back down. "Watch your mouth, you little punk," Terrence growled. "You think you are tough. Let me tell you something. I know people. I play golf with the superintendent of your school district. I know the head of the school board. If you do not kick the old man out onto the street by tonight, I will make one phone call. Just one, and you will be fired. You will lose your pension. You will be blacklisted from every school in the state." Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Jordan's face went pale. Being a teacher was not just his job, it was his life. It was his calling. "You wouldn't," Jordan whispered. "Try me," Terrence smiled, a cruel, shark-like grin. "You are already broke, Jordan. Imagine being broke and unemployed. How will you feed your wife then? How will you feed him? Do the smart thing. Put him in a shelter. Get him out of our lives, or I will destroy the little life you have managed to scrape together." The room fell silent. The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It was the ultimate power play. Terrence was using his influence to crush his brother, just to get rid of his father. I stepped forward. I couldn't let Jordan lose his career for me. I opened my mouth to speak, to tell them I would go to surrender, but Jordan spoke first. "Do it," he said. Terrence blinked, confused. "What?" "Do it," Jordan repeated, louder this time. "Call the superintendent. Call the board. Call the President of the United States for all I care. Fire me. Take my job. Take my pension. But you are not taking my father. And you are not taking my dignity." Jordan shoved Terrence back. It was a hard, physical shove that sent Terrence stumbling into the coffee table. "You think your money makes you powerful?" Jordan yelled, his voice cracking with emotion. "You think because you wear expensive suits you are a man. You are nothing. You are small. You are weak. You would sell your own blood for $1. Jasmine gasped, clutching her pearls. "You cannot talk to us like that. We are your elders." "You are strangers," Jordan spat at her. "You are intruders. This house is small and it smells, and it is falling apart. But it has more love in 1 square foot than your mansions have in 1,000 acres. He pointed to the door, his finger shaking. "Get out. Get out before I call the cops and have you arrested for trespassing and breaking my door. Get out!" Terrence straightened his jacket, trying to regain his composure, but his eyes were darting around nervously. He hadn't expected this. He had expected Jordan to fold. He had expected fear. He hadn't expected a spine of steel. "You are making a mistake," Jordan Terrence hissed, backing toward the door. "A huge mistake. You are going to regret this. You are going to die in this gutter. And you," Jasmine said, looking at me with pure venom, "you are dead to us, Dad. Do not call us when you are starving. Do not call us when he fails you. You chose this." "We did not choose this," I said quietly, my voice cutting through the tension. "You drove us to it. Now leave." They retreated. They backed out of the apartment, tripping over the broken door frame. They fled down the stairs, their footsteps hurried and chaotic. They were running away from the truth Jordan had thrown in their faces. I stood there behind my son. He was breathing hard, his hands balled into fists at his sides. He was shaking. Emily rushed to him, wrapping her arms around his waist, burying her face in his back. I reached out and placed my hand on Jordan's shoulder. It felt solid. It felt strong, "Jordan," I said, my voice thick with pride. He turned to look at me. There were tears in his eyes, but his chin was high. "I meant it, Dad," he said. "Let them fire me. I can find another job. I can dig ditches. I can wash cars. But I am not letting them win. I am not letting them hurt you." I pulled him into a hug. I held him tighter than I had ever held anyone. In that moment, standing in the wreckage of his living room, with the door broken and his career threatened, I felt a surge of protection so fierce it almost brought me to my knees. "They will not fire you, son," I whispered into his ear, though he couldn't know what I meant. "They will not touch a hair on your head. I looked over his shoulder at the empty doorway where the wolves had just fled. They thought they had won. They thought they had crushed him, but they had done something far worse. They had woken up the sleeping giant. They had given me the final reason I needed to destroy them. I patted Jordan's back. "It is okay," I said. "We are going to be okay." I stepped back and looked at Emily. "Do you have any tape?" I asked. "We need to fix the door." She nodded, wiping her eyes, and ran to the kitchen drawer. We spent the next hour taping cardboard over the broken frame, securing the lock as best we could. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The air in the apartment had changed. The fear was gone, replaced by a righteous anger. When we finished, Jordan sat on the couch, staring at his hands. I knew he was thinking about his job, about the threat. I walked to the window and looked down at the street. The Porsche and the Range Rover were gone. I reached into my pocket and felt the cool plastic of the satellite phone. It was time. The observation period was over. The wolves had shown their teeth, and now it was time for the hunter to step out of the shadows. "I am going to take a nap," I told them, lying smoothly. The excitement wore me out. "Go ahead, Dad," Jordan said. "Rest. We are here." I went into the bedroom and closed the door. I didn't go to the bed. I went to the closet and pulled out the phone. I sat on the floor in the corner, hidden from view. I dialed Henderson's number. It rang once. "Yes, sir?" Henderson's voice was crisp and professional. "It is time," I said, my voice cold and hard, like flint. "Phase 2. I want you to arrange a medical emergency. A heart attack." "Sir." Henderson asked, a hint of confusion in his voice. "A fake one," I clarified. "I need to get into a hospital, a public one. The one near Jordan's apartment. I need a doctor on our payroll to admit me, and I need it to look fatal." "I understand, sir," Henderson said. "May I ask why?" "Because I need to give them one last chance to hang themselves," I said. "I need Jordan to ask for help one last time so they can deny him while I am dying. I need them to put it in writing. And then, Henderson, then we drop the hammer." "Very good, sir. I will have the team ready in 1 hour." I hung up the phone. I sat in the dark listening to my son and his wife whispering in the other room, trying to figure out how to survive the next day. They were terrified, but they were safe. They just didn't know it yet. Tomorrow, I would die. And then Winston Carter, the billionaire, would be reborn to rain fire down upon the wicked. I closed my eyes and waited for the ambulance I had just ordered for myself. The final act was about to begin. The silence in the apartment following my call to Henderson was thick with tension, but underneath it lay a calmness that only I could feel. Jordan and Emily were moving around quietly, trying to make the space comfortable for me, unaware that the stage was set for the final act. I waited until the clock on the wall hit the hour mark exactly. When Henderson said the medical team would be in position, it was time to execute the most dangerous lie I had ever told. I stood up from the floor where I had been sitting and walked into the small living room. Jordan was sitting at the table, his head in his hands, staring at the empty space where his wedding ring used to be. I took a deep breath and let out a sharp gasp, clutching my chest with both hands. I staggered forward, knocking into the side of the doorframe with a loud thud. "Dad!" Jordan shouted, his head snapping up. I let my knees buckle. I didn't fall gently. I let gravity take me down hard, hitting the linoleum floor with a bone-jarring crash that shook the thin walls. I curled onto my side, pressing my hand over my heart, squeezing my eyes shut, and letting out a guttural groan of pain. It was a performance fueled by a lifetime of watching sharks in boardrooms feign weakness before the kill. But this time, the stakes were infinitely higher. Jordan was beside me in a second. He dropped to his knees, his hands hovering over me, terrified to touch me, terrified not to. "Dad, can you hear me? Dad, what is wrong? Emily, help!" Emily rushed out of the bedroom, her nurse training kicking in instantly. She checked my pulse, her fingers cool against my neck. I held my breath, forcing my heart rate to skip, forcing my body to mimic the distress I was faking. "His pulse is erratic," Emily said, her voice calm but tight with fear. "He is clammy. Jordan, call 911. Now." Jordan fumbled for his phone, his fingers shaking so badly he dropped it once before dialing. I watched him through slits in my eyes. I saw the panic, the sheer terror of a son watching his father die. "Hello, I need an ambulance," Jordan yelled into the phone. "My father is having a heart attack. "We are at 452 East Ninth Street, apartment 4B. Please hurry." He paused, listening to the operator. His face went pale. "What do you mean? 20 minutes?" he screamed. "He does not have 20 minutes. He is dying right now." He slammed the phone down onto the floor, cracking the screen. "They said there is a backlog," Jordan said, his voice breaking. "They said this is a non-priority zone. It will take too long, Emily. We cannot wait." He looked at me gasping on the floor. He looked at the door. He made a decision that no son should have to make. "I am taking him," Jordan said. He bent down and scooped me up. I am a heavy man. I weigh over 200 pounds. Jordan is lean, built like a runner, not a weightlifter. But he didn't hesitate. He grunted with the effort, the veins in his neck bulging as he lifted me into his arms. "Jordan, you can't carry him down 4 flights, Emily cried, grabbing his arm. "You will hurt yourself." "Grab the door," Jordan grit out his teeth, clenched. "Just open the doors." He carried me out into the hallway. The air was stale and cold. He moved toward the stairs. I felt his arms trembling under my weight. I felt his heart hammering against my side faster than my own. "Hang on, Dad," he whispered, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. "Just hang on. I have got you." He took the first step, then the second. He didn't walk. He ran. He moved with a desperate strength, fueled by adrenaline and love. We rounded the first landing. He stumbled his shoulder, slamming into the concrete wall to keep us from falling, but he didn't drop me. He simply adjusted his grip and kept going. I closed my eyes, fighting the urge to tell him to put me down. The guilt was overwhelming. I was heavy. I was a burden, physically and metaphorically. But I needed this. I needed to know that when the weight of the world was on his shoulders, he wouldn't buckle. We reached the lobby. Jordan kicked the front door open and burst out onto the street. The cool air hit my face. He didn't stop. He ran toward his beat-up sedan parked illegally by the hydrant. Emily was right behind him, opening the back door. He laid me across the back seat, gently protecting my head, as if I were made of glass. He was drenched in sweat, his chest heaving, his arms shaking from the exertion. "Stay with him, Em," Jordan yelled as he jumped into the driver's seat. "Keep him awake." The engine roared to life, sputtering and coughing before catching. Jordan peeled away from the curb, driving like a man possessed. He ran red lights. He honked at pedestrians. He drove with the singular focus of saving my life. I lay in the back seat listening to the engine whine, and I realized that my son hadn't just carried me down the stairs. He had carried me his whole life, waiting for a chance to show me that he was strong enough. The public hospital was a war zone. It smelled of antiseptic old blood and despair. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly green pallor on everyone in the waiting room. It was overcrowded, underfunded, and chaotic. The exact kind of place people like Terrence and Jasmine avoided like the plague. But this was where I had told Henderson to send the doctor. Jordan pulled up to the emergency bay, screeching to a halt. He jumped out and grabbed a wheelchair from a startled orderly. He pulled me out of the car and wheeled me inside, shouting for help. "My father is having a heart attack," he yelled, his voice cutting through the din of the waiting room. "Someone help him." A team of nurses surrounded us. They were real nurses, not actors, but they had been briefed by Dr. Evans, my plant on the inside. They whisked me away behind the double doors, leaving Jordan and Emily standing in the hallway, holding each other. Inside the exam room, Dr. Evans was waiting. He was a tall man with a stern face, wearing a white coat that looked too clean for this place. He winked at me discreetly as the nurses hooked me up to the monitors. "Ready for the show, Mr. Carter," he whispered. "Do it," I said, my voice steady. "Make it look bad." He nodded and walked out to the hallway where Jordan was pacing. I could hear them through the open door. "Family of Winston Carter," Dr. Evans called out. "Here," Jordan said, rushing forward. "Is he okay? Is he alive?" "Doctor," Evans sighed a sound of professional gravity. "He is alive, but barely. Your father has a massive blockage in his left anterior descending artery. We call it the Widowmaker. His heart is failing as we speak." "Oh God," Emily gasped. "Can you fix it?" Jordan asked. "You can do surgery, right? A bypass?" "We can," Dr. Evans said, "but there is a complication. This is a specialized procedure, and given his age and the severity of the blockage, we need to use a specific type of stent and a robotic surgical team. This hospital, We are a public facility. We have budget caps. What are you saying? Jordan demanded, his voice rising. I am saying that this specific procedure is considered elective under state guidelines. For patients over 65 with no insurance, Dr. Evans lied smoothly. We need a deposit to book the operating theater and the specialist team. A deposit? Jordan asked. How much? $50,000, Dr. Evans said. And we need it now, within the hour. If we do not operate immediately, he will not survive the night. 50,000. Jordan repeated the number, choking him. We don't have $50,000. We don't have $50. Can't you bill us? Can't we do a payment plan? I'm afraid not, Dr. Evans said, his voice cold and bureaucratic. Policy is strict. No pay, no procedure. I am sorry. You have 1 hour to find the funds. He turned and walked back into the room, leaving Jordan standing in the hallway, stunned. I watched from the bed. Jordan looked like he had been punched in the gut. He looked at Emily. She was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. 50,000, she whispered. We can't do that, Jordan. It is impossible. Jordan stared at the wall. He stared at the floor. Then he stared at the door to my room. His face changed. The shock evaporated, replaced by a look of sheer, desperate determination. I have to call them, he said. Who? Emily asked. Terrence and Jasmine, he said. They have money. They are rich. They won't let him die. Not for money. They might hate me, but they won't let Dad die. He pulled out his phone. The screen was cracked from when he dropped it, but it still worked. He walked down the hallway, away from the noise of the ER, seeking a quiet corner to beg for my life. I strained to listen, my heart aching for him. This was the final test. The test not for Jordan, but for his siblings. I needed to know if there was any shred of humanity left in them. Jordan dialed Terrence first. I could hear his voice echoing off the tile walls. Terrence, pick up. It is Dad. He is at General Hospital. He is dying, Terrence. He needs surgery. It is his heart. There was a pause. Jordan listened. His posture slumped. $50,000, Jordan said. Yes, I know it is a lot, but he will die without it. You just bought a Porsche, Terrence. You have the money. Please. He is our father. Jordan pulled the phone away from his ear, staring at it in disbelief. I could hear the faint, tinny sound of Terrence's voice shouting on the other end. Liquid assets, Jordan repeated into the phone, his voice rising in anger. You are telling me your assets are tied up. You are telling me you can't transfer 50 grand to save Dad's life because the market is down. Are you insane? He paid for your house, Terrence. He paid for everything. He listened again, then he slammed his hand against the wall. Fine, Jordan shouted. Keep your money. I hope it keeps you warm at his funeral. He hung up. He was shaking. He didn't stop. He dialed Jasmine. Jasmine, it is Jordan. Dad is dying. We need money for surgery. Terrence said no. You have to help. He listened. His face went from angry to horrified. What do you mean let him go? Jordan whispered. He is not a dog, Jasmine. We don't just put him down because it is expensive. He is conscious. He is scared. He listened for another moment. Tears welled up in his eyes. A release. Jordan repeated her words, his voice trembling with rage. You think death is a release for him? Or is it a release for you? You are sick, Jasmine, both of you. You are rot. He hung up the phone. He stood there alone in the hallway of a public hospital, abandoned by his family with no money and a dying father. He looked at the phone in his hand as if he wanted to crush it. Then he took a deep breath. He wiped his face with his sleeve. He walked back toward Emily. What did they say? She asked, hoping against hope. They said no, Jordan said, his voice flat and dead. They said let him die. Oh my God, Emily sobbed. But I am not going to let him die, Jordan said. He walked past her, straight to the nurse's station. He grabbed a clipboard from the counter. Where can I get a loan? He asked the nurse. Not a bank loan, a fast loan. I know there are guys who come around here. I have seen them. The nurse looked at him, pity in her eyes. Sir, those are predatory lenders. The interest rates are 300%. They will take everything you have. They will garnish your wages for the rest of your life. I don't care, Jordan said, slamming his hand on the counter. Give me the number. I will sign whatever they want. I will sign away my car, my salary, my life. Just give me the money to save my father. I watched from the bed. My son, the poor teacher, the failure, was willing to sell his future to a loan shark to buy me a few more years. He was signing his life away for a man he thought was a beggar. That was it. The test was over. I had seen enough. I reached for the call button on the side of the bed. I pressed it 3 times, the signal for Dr. Evans. He walked in, closing the curtain behind him. "Sir?" he asked. "It is done," I said, my voice strong and clear. "Call Henderson, tell him to bring the check, and tell him to bring the security team. We are leaving this dump. And Dr. Evans, get my son in here, before he signs that paper." Dr. Evans nodded and hurried out. I sat up in the bed, ripping the sensors off my chest. The beeping of the monitor went flatline, but I wasn't dying. I was being reborn. And the wrath of Winston Carter was about to descend on this city like a hurricane. The crisis in the hospital room de-escalated with the calculated precision of a military operation. Dr. Evans played his part perfectly, stepping back from the ledge of immediate surgery, claiming my vitals had stabilized, just enough to postpone the operation for 24 hours. It was a reprieve, but a costly one. He warned Jordan that without a comprehensive care plan, I was a ticking time bomb. Jordan was slumped in the plastic chair by my bed, his face buried in his hands, the adrenaline crash leaving him trembling. He had been ready to sign his life away to a predator, and now he was left with the crushing weight of a tomorrow he could not afford. My phone, which Jordan had recovered from his pocket, buzzed. It was Terrence. Jordan looked at the screen, and a flicker of hope crossed his tired face. He answered on speaker so I could hear. Jordan. Terrence's voice was smooth, devoid of the panic from earlier. "I heard about the situation at the hospital. It sounds serious. Look, we cannot discuss this. Over the phone, I have called a family meeting. We need to make a decision tonight about Dad's long-term care. Bring him to Le Grand, which is the French restaurant on 5th Avenue. We have a private room waiting. Do not be late." Jordan's eyes widened. Le Grand was the most exclusive restaurant in the city, the kind of place where a glass of water costs more than our weekly grocery budget. "Terrence, we cannot go there," Jordan stammered. "We are in dirty clothes. Dad is in a hospital gown and a coat. We don't have money for dinner." "Do not worry about the bill," Terrence said, his voice dripping with magnanimity. "It is taken care of. Just get him there. We are finally going to step up, Jordan. We are going to fix this." He hung up. Jordan looked at Emily, tears welling in his eyes. "They are going to help," he whispered. "They are finally going to help. They realized how close he came to dying, and they are stepping up." I said nothing. I let him have his hope. I let him help me into my wheelchair and guide me out of the hospital. But inside, I felt a cold knot of certainty. Terrence wasn't paying for dinner to help me. He was paying for a venue to discard me in style. He didn't want to come to the slums. He wanted to do his dirty work on his own turf, surrounded by waiters who would sweep up the mess. We arrived at Le Grand in Jordan's battered sedan. The valet looked at the rust on the fenders with open disdain, refusing to open the door until Jordan stepped out and did it himself. Emily helped me out of the car. My legs were shaky, partially from the act and partially from the sheer exhaustion of the charade. I leaned heavily on Jordan, my tattered coat looking like a gray stain against the polished marble of the restaurant's entrance. The contrast was violent. Inside the restaurant was a temple of gold and velvet. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, casting a warm, flattering light on the diners who sat in plush booths wearing silk and diamonds. The air smelled of truffle oil and expensive perfume. As we walked through the main dining room, the hum of conversation died down. Heads turned, forks paused halfway to mouths. I saw the looks of repulsion. The patrons stared at my muddy boots, Jordan's frayed collar, and Emily's worn scrubs. We were intruders. We were the reality they paid thousands of dollars to avoid. The hostess, a woman with a face like stone, stepped in front of us, blocking the path. "Sir, you cannot be in here," she said to Jordan, her voice a hushed hiss. "We have a dress code. The service entrance is in the alley." "We are meeting the Carter party," Jordan said, his voice trembling but defiant. "My brother is expecting us." The hostess hesitated, then saw Terrence waving from the glass-walled private room at the back. She pursed her lips, looking as if she had swallowed a lemon, and gestured for us to follow. "Keep your voices down," she instructed. "Do not touch the other guests." We walked the gauntlet of judgment. I kept my head down, playing the part of the ashamed, broken old man. But my eyes were sharp, taking in every detail. When we reached the private room, the scene was set. Terrence and Victoria sat at the head of the table, sipping champagne. Jasmine and Hunter were on the right, picking at a tower of oysters on ice. They looked immaculate. They looked rich. They looked like vultures waiting for a carcass. "Well, you made it," Terrence said, not standing up, not offering a hand. He gestured vaguely to the empty chairs at the foot of the table. "Sit down. Try not to touch the tablecloths. They are Egyptian cotton." Jordan pulled out a chair for me and helped me sit. I slumped forward, letting my mouth hang open slightly, pretending to be dazed by medication. Emily sat next to me, her hand on my arm, protective and fierce. Jordan took the last seat, looking at the seafood tower with a mixture of hunger and hope. "So," Jordan said, his voice eager, "you said you have a plan. You said you were going to help." "Yes," Hunter said, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "We have a plan. We have been running the numbers, Jordan, and frankly, your approach is unsustainable. You are a teacher. You make pennies. You cannot support a man with Winston's medical needs. It is cruel to keep him in that tenement." "So what are you suggesting?" Jordan asked. Jasmine reached under the table and pulled out a thick document clipped to a plastic board. She slid it across the mahogany table toward Jordan. It wasn't a menu. It wasn't a check. It was a government form printed on cheap paper. The header read, "State Department of Indigent Care, Permanent Placement Application." "What is this?" Jordan asked, staring at the paper. "It is the solution," Jasmine said, her voice devoid of emotion. "It is a state-run facility for the homeless and indigent elderly. It is called Shady Pines. It is 2 hours north of here. It is a dormitory-style facility. They have a medical ward. They provide 3 meals a day and a bed. It is free, Jordan." Jordan picked up the paper, his hands shaking. He read the fine print. "This is a shelter," he said, his voice rising. "This is a warehouse for people with no families. It says here, residents surrender all personal rights. It says overcrowding is common. It says, Jasmine, this is a place where people go to die alone. It is a place where he will be fed," Hunter interrupted, his lawyer voice smooth and practicing. "It is the economic solution. You have no assets, Jordan. We have assets, but they are illiquid, tied up in investments. We cannot access cash right now. The market is volatile. This is the responsible choice. You want to put him in a shelter?" Jordan whispered, looking from one sibling to the other. "You invited us to a 5-star restaurant, eating oysters and drinking champagne to tell us you are dumping Dad in a state asylum." "It is not dumping him," Victoria chimed in, wrinkling her nose. "It is placing him. It is professional care. Look at him, Jordan. He is a mess. He is drooling. He is senile. He doesn't know where he is. He won't know the difference between a palace and a dormitory." "I do know where I am," I rasped, speaking for the first time. My voice was weak, dry as dust. "I am with my children." Terrence rolled his eyes. "Oh God, here comes the guilt trip." "Listen, Dad, sign the paper. The van is outside." "What van?" Emily asked. "The transport van," Terrence said, checking his watch. "We called them an hour ago. They are parked out back. They specialize in immediate intake. They will take him tonight, right now. He will have a bed by midnight. It is done." Jordan stood up, kicking his chair back. "You called a transport van before we even talked. You trapped us here." "Sit down, Jordan," Terrence barked, slamming his hand on the table. "You are being emotional. We are being practical. Do you have $50,000 for his surgery? No. Do you have money for rent? No. If you keep him, you will all starve. Is that what you want? Do you want to drag your wife down with you? Do you want to lose your job? Because I promise you, if you walk out of here with him, I will make that call to the superintendent tonight. You will be destitute." Jordan looked at me, agony in his eyes. He looked at Emily, who was weeping silently. He looked at the document. The pen was sitting on top of it, a sleek black Mont Blanc that probably cost more than Jordan's car. "Sign it, Dad," Hunter said, leaning forward, his eyes predatory. "It is for the best. It is the only way to save Jordan. You don't want to destroy your favorite son, do you? Be a man, Winston. Do the right thing and leave." I looked at the document. It was a death warrant. It was a final rejection signed in ink. They weren't just refusing to help me, they were erasing me. They were shipping me off to a place where I would be a number, a statistic forgotten. They were doing it over a dinner that cost $2,000. I looked at Jordan. I saw the fight draining out of him, not because he didn't love me, but because he was cornered. They had used his love for me as a weapon against him. They were forcing him to choose between my survival in a hellhole or our collective destruction on the street. I reached out a trembling hand. I took the pen. My fingers felt cold against the metal. I looked at Terrence. He was smiling. A small, victorious smile. He thought he was had won. He thought he had solved the problem. "Is this what you want, son?" I whispered, looking him in the eye. "It is what is necessary," Terrence said, pouring himself another glass of champagne. "Just sign it, Dad, and then you can go." I lowered the pen to the paper. I pressed the nib against the signature line. The ink bled slightly into the cheap paper, creating a small black dot. I took a breath. I let my hand shake. I let the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. Then I stopped. I lifted the pen. I looked at the nib, shiny and black. "No," Jordan said, his voice a broken sob. "Dad, don't." I looked at Jordan, and then I looked at Terrence. And then for the first time in 3 days, I sat up straight. I rolled my shoulders back. I stopped the shaking. I let the mask of the senile, broken old man slip away just enough to reveal the shark beneath. I placed the pen gently on the table. "No," I said. My voice wasn't raspy anymore. It was deep. It was resonant. It was the voice that had commanded boardrooms for 40 years. "What did you say?" Hunter asked, frowning. I said no. I stood up, pushing the wheelchair back. I stood on my own 2 feet, steady and strong. I looked at the oysters. I looked at the champagne. I looked at my children. "I am not signing this," I said, "and I am not going to Shady Pines. But Terrence, you are right about one thing. Someone is leaving in a van tonight, but it isn't going to be me." The door to the private room burst open. It wasn't a waiter. It wasn't the transport driver. It was Henderson, flanked by 4 private security officers wearing tactical gear. He walked in carrying a leather briefcase, his face set in a grim line. "Good evening, Mr. Carter," Henderson said, ignoring the others completely. "Your helicopter is waiting at the helipad. The transfer of assets is complete. We are ready when you are." The room went dead silent. Terrence dropped his glass. It shattered, the sound exploding like a gunshot in the quiet room. But no one looked at the glass. They were all looking at me, looking at the man who had just stood up from the dead. The sound of paper tearing was not loud, but in that silent, suffocating room, it sounded like a gunshot. Jordan did not just rip the form, he destroyed it. He grabbed the clipboard from the table and tore the document into 2 pieces, then 4, then 8, until the state seal and the fine print about surrendering rights were nothing but confetti raining down onto the pristine Egyptian cotton tablecloth. He stood there, panting, his chest heaving, his eyes burning with a fire that seemed to consume the last of his fear. He looked at Terrence and then at Jasmine, and finally he rested his gaze on Hunter, who was still leaning forward with that predatory smirk plastered on his face. "I am not signing it," Jordan said, his voice low and vibrating with intensity. "And neither is he. You think you can bully us because we are broke? You think you can throw him away like he is garbage just because his pockets are empty? You are wrong." Hunter laughed a dry sound that scraped against my nerves like sandpaper. He shook his head, looking at Jordan with the kind of pity one might reserve for a slow child. "Oh, Jordan," Hunter said, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms over his expensive suit. "You are so dramatic. Look at the mess you made. Now someone has to clean that up. And for what? A symbolic gesture. Tearing up a piece of paper does not change the math, my friend. It changes everything," Jordan shot back. "It means he is not going to that hellhole. It means he is coming home with me." "To what?" Hunter sneered. "To a dark apartment with no food. To a landlord who is going to kick you out on Friday. You are a math teacher, Jordan. Do the math. You have 0 assets. You have negative cash flow. You have a wife you are dragging down into the gutter with you. What are you going to do when he gets sick again? What are you going to do when he needs medicine you cannot afford? Are you going to pay with hugs? Are you going to pay with good intentions?" "I will figure it out," Jordan yelled, slamming his fist onto the table, causing the silverware to jump. "I will sell my car. I will take a second job. I will sell a kidney if I have to. I do not care what it costs. I will sell my own blood before I let you put him in a van and ship him off to die alone." Jasmine rolled her eyes, picking at a piece of lint on her skirt. "Sell a kidney," she mocked. "Listen to yourself. You sound unhinged. This is exactly why Dad cannot stay with you. You are unstable. You are desperate. You are a poor history teacher, Jordan. You do not have the capacity to handle this. You barely have the capacity to handle your own pathetic life. You are pathetic, Jordan spat back, tears of frustration welling in his eyes. You have millions and you have nothing. You are empty. You are hollow shells walking around in designer clothes, pretending to be human beings. Hunter stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. He was taller than Jordan, broader, and he used that size now to intimidate. He walked around the table until he was looming over my youngest son. "Sit down, little man," Hunter said, his voice dropping to a growl. "You have no authority here. You have no leverage. You are a gnat buzzing in the ear of giants. We made a decision. The family made a decision. You were going to step aside. You were going to let us put him in that van, and you were going to go back to your little classroom and teach history, because you are certainly not making any tonight." Jordan did not back down. He stood his ground, his fists clenched at his sides, ready to fight a man twice his size, for the sake of a father he thought was helpless. I watched them. I watched my youngest son, the one I had underestimated, the one I had ignored, standing like a warrior against the wolves. And then I watched the wolves laughing at him. I saw Terrence pouring himself another glass of wine, shaking his head with amusement. I saw Victoria checking her phone, bored by the drama. I saw Jasmine looking at her reflection in a spoon. They were not just cruel, they were indifferent. And that indifference was the final straw. It was the spark that ignited the fuel I had been gathering for 3 days. The coldness in my chest vanished, replaced by a heat so intense it felt like a furnace. The time for tests was over. The time for suffering was done. I stopped shaking. It was a conscious decision, a physical command I sent to every muscle in my body. The tremors in my hands ceased. The slump in my shoulders evaporated. The weakness in my neck disappeared. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the air that smelled of expensive food and rot. I let the air out slowly, and with it went the persona of Winston, the broken old man. I sat up straight. My spine snapped into alignment. I lifted my head. My eyes, which had been dull and watery for the past 72 hours, cleared instantly. They became sharp-focused and hard as diamonds. I looked at Hunter, who was still looming over Jordan. I looked at Terrence, who was raising his glass to his lips. Enough. The word was not shouted. It was not screamed. It was spoken at a normal volume, but it carried the weight of a gavel striking a sound block. It cut through the tension in the room like a razor blade. Hunter stopped mid-sentence. He turned his head slowly, frowning, confused by the change in tone. Jordan looked down at me, his eyes wide, expecting to see me collapsing again. "Dad," Jordan whispered, "are you okay?" I did not answer him. Not yet. I did not look at him. I kept my eyes fixed on Terrence. I reached out my hand. My movement was fluid, precise, and steady. There was no tremor. There was no hesitation. I reached across the white tablecloth and wrapped my fingers around the stem of the crystal wine glass sitting in front of Terrence. It was a glass of Chateau Margaux, a vintage I had introduced him to 10 years ago, a wine that cost $600 a bottle, a wine meant to be savored by people who understood value. Terrence froze the glass halfway to his mouth. He looked at my hand. He looked at the grip. It was not the grip of a frail old man. It was the grip of a man who built skyscrapers. It was the grip of a man who crushed competitors. "Dad, what are you doing?" Terrence asked, his voice wavering slightly, a flicker of unease crossing his face. I pulled the glass from his hand. He let it go, too stunned to resist. I held it up to the light, swirling the deep red liquid. I watched the legs of the wine run down the side of the glass. I stood up. I did not struggle to stand. I did not use the table for support. I stood up with the power and grace of a man in his prime. I towered over the table. I seemed to grow in height, filling the room with a presence that had been dormant for too long. The atmosphere in the private room shifted violently. The air became thin. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jasmine dropped her fork. It clattered loudly onto her plate. Victoria looked up from her phone, her mouth falling open. Hunter stepped back from Jordan, instinctively sensing a threat he could not identify. "You boys have forgotten something I said." My voice was deep, resonant, the voice that had closed billion-dollar deals. "You forgot who built the table you are sitting at." Winston Victoria squeaked. "What is happening? Why are you standing like that?" I ignored her. I turned my gaze to Terrence. He was sitting there, looking up at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. He saw it. He saw the father he remembered. He saw the Titan, and he could not understand how the beggar had vanished so quickly. You sit there drinking my wine, spending my money, breathing my air, and you dare to throw me away like a used napkin, I said softly. You look at your brother, a man who has more integrity in his little finger than you have in your entire body, and you mock him. You mock him for being poor. You mock him for having a heart. Dad, you are confusing me, Terrence stammered, standing up his chair, sliding back. You are sick. You need to sit down. You are having an episode. I am not having an episode, I said, stepping closer to him. I am having a moment of clarity. I watched you, Terrence. I watched you for 3 days. I gave you every chance. I begged you. I pleaded with you. I gave you the opportunity to be a son, and you chose to be a parasite. I looked at the wine in the glass, the rich, dark, red liquid. You like the finer things, I said. You like the taste of success, but you never earned it. You never bled for it. You just drank it. I did not yell. I did not scream. I simply flicked my wrist. The wine flew out of the glass in a perfect crimson arc. It hit Terrence square in the face. It splashed over his expensive silk tie. It soaked into his white Egyptian cotton shirt, turning it the color of a fresh wound. It dripped from his nose and chin, ruining the perfect image he had cultivated so carefully. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the drip, drip, drip of the wine hitting the floor. Terrence stood there frozen, his eyes squeezed shut, the liquid running down his face. The shock was absolute. No one had ever dared to touch him. No one had ever dared to disrespect him, especially not the father he thought he owned. Then the shock turned to rage, pure, unadulterated rage. His eyes snapped open and they were wild. He wiped the wine from his eyes, smearing it across his cheeks like war paint. "You crazy old bastard," he screamed. He lunged. He didn't think. He didn't calculate. He just reacted. He threw himself across the table, his hands reaching for my throat, his face twisted into a mask of violence. He wanted to hurt me. He wanted to crush the source of his humiliation. Jordan shouted, diving forward to intercept him, but he was too far away. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I stood my ground, holding the empty glass, my eyes locked on my son's face as he flew toward me. I wasn't afraid. I knew what was behind that door. I knew who was waiting in the hall, and I knew that Terrence had just made the last mistake of his privileged life. Before his fingers could graze my collar, the double doors to the private room burst open with a force that shook the walls. The sound of heavy boots thundered into the room, drowning out Terrence's scream. The time for games was over. The time for consequences had arrived. The heavy double doors of the private dining room did not just open. They exploded inward with a violence that shook the crystal chandelier above us. Splinters of wood flew into the air as the locking mechanism gave way under a force far greater than a waiter with a tray. Terrence was mid-lunge, his hands inches from my throat, his face a mask of murderous rage, when a wall of muscle slammed into him. It happened so fast, it was a blur of motion. One moment my son was flying across the table, intent on strangling me, and the next he was airborne in the opposite direction. A security officer built like a linebacker had tackled him mid-air, intercepting him with the efficiency of a guided missile. They crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs and expensive fabric, knocking over chairs and sending a serving cart crashing into the wall. "Get off me," Terrence screamed, thrashing against the weight pressing him down. "Do you know who I am? I will sue you. I will ruin you." The guard did not speak. He simply applied a pressure hold that immobilized Terrence instantly, pinning his face against the plush carpet. 3 other guards fanned out into the room, securing the perimeter, their eyes scanning for threats. They were professionals. They moved with a silent, lethal grace that terrified the civilians in the room. Hunter backed away, his hands raised in surrender, his back hitting the wall. Victoria let out a high-pitched shriek, clutching her pearls. Jasmine froze, her mouth open in a silent scream of terror. Then, through the shattered doorway walked Arthur Henderson. He stepped over the debris with the calm indifference of a man who had walked through corporate war zones for 30 years. He was wearing a bespoke 3-piece suit that cost more than Jordan's annual salary. He carried a leather briefcase in one hand, and he did not look at the guards or the screaming man on the floor. He looked only at me. "Mr. Carter," Henderson said, his voice calm and steady amidst the chaos. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance. The traffic was worse than anticipated, and we received the distress signal from your device. Are you injured, sir?" I stood there, wine dripping from my hand, my heart beating a slow, powerful rhythm. I brushed a speck of lint from my tattered coat. "I am fine, Henderson," I said. "Just a little family dispute. You are right on time." Terrence groaned from the floor, twisting his head to look up. "Henderson," he gasped, recognizing the man. "What are you doing here? Get this animal off me. Tell him who I am." Henderson looked down at Terrence. He adjusted his glasses, peering at my son with the same expression one might use when looking at a stain on a shoe. "I know exactly who you are, Terrence," Henderson said coldly. "You are the man who just attempted to assault my client, and if you do not stop struggling, I will authorize my team to use tasers. I suggest you stay down." The room fell into a heavy, terrified silence. The guard eased the pressure slightly, allowing Terrence to breathe, but keeping him pinned. Jordan stood next to me, his eyes wide, looking from the guards to Henderson and then to me. "Dad," Jordan whispered, "what is going on? Who are these people?" I turned to Jordan. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "It is okay, son," I said. "The cavalry has arrived." Henderson walked to the table. He cleared a space, pushing aside the oyster platters and the champagne buckets with a sweep of his arm. He placed the leather briefcase on the white tablecloth. The click of the brass latches opening echoed in the room like the cocking of a gun. He lifted the lid. He reached inside and pulled out a single envelope. It was thick. It was heavy. He opened it and withdrew a cashier's check. He placed it on the table facing Terrence, facing Jasmine, facing the world. The paper was blue and crisp. The bank logo was embossed in silver, but it was the numbers typed in the center that sucked the air out of the room. $60 million. There were 6 zeros, a 6 followed by 7 zeros to be precise. It sat there on the table, a piece of paper that represented more power than anyone in that room had ever touched. Terrence stopped struggling. He stared at the check from his vantage point on the floor. His eyes bulged. His mouth went slack. Jasmine stood up slowly, drawn to the table by a magnetic force she could not resist. She looked at the check. She looked at the name on the payee line. Winston Carter. She looked at the signature line. It was authorized by the Treasury Department of Carter Holdings. Henderson straightened his jacket and clasped his hands behind his back. He looked at me with a bow of deep respect. "Mr. Chairman," Henderson said, his voice ringing with authority, "the liquidity you requested is secured. $60 million in certified funds. The helicopter is fueled and waiting at the rooftop helipad to transport you to the estate. We also have the cash reserves in the car if you prefer. This should cover your petty cash needs for the evening." Petty cash. The words hung in the air, absurd and terrifying. $60 million was petty cash. Hunter choked. He actually choked, coughing into his hand, his eyes darting back and forth between me and the check. Chairman Hunter squeaked. "But he is broke. He lost everything," he told us. I laughed. It was a low, dark sound that rumbled in my chest. I walked over to the table and picked up the check. I held it up to the light, just as I had held the wine glass moments before. "I told you what you needed to hear," I said. "I told you I was broke, because I wanted to see if you loved me, or if you loved my wallet. And you gave me my answer, loud and clear." Terrence pushed himself up to his knees, the guard allowing it this time. He looked at me, his face streaked with wine and sweat, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. "Dad," he stammered, "this is a joke, right? You have $60 million. You have had it this whole time." I looked down at him. "I have 600 million, Terrence," I said, correcting him. "This is just what I could liquidate in an hour." The color drained from his face so fast, he looked like a corpse. Jasmine grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. Victoria sank into her chair, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. "But the house," Jasmine whispered. "You were living in a townhouse. You drove a Buick. You wore old suits." "I lived modestly because I value privacy," I said. "I lived modestly because I wanted to raise children who valued hard work. I failed. I raised parasites who value labels." I turned to Henderson. "Do they know yet, Henderson?" I asked. Henderson smiled, a thin, shark-like smile. "No, sir, I do not believe they do." "Show them," I said. Henderson reached back into the briefcase. He pulled out 3 thick files. He tossed the first one onto the table in front of Terrence. It landed with a heavy thud. Terrence picked it up, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He opened the file. It was a loan document, a mortgage document to be precise. "What is this?" Terrence asked, his voice trembling. "This is my mortgage. This is my loan with First National Bank. Read the header," Henderson said. Terrence looked at the top of the page. He squinted. First National Bank, a subsidiary of Carter Holdings. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You own the bank," he whispered. "I bought it 6 years ago," I said calmly. "I hold the note on your house, Terrence. I hold the note on your car. I hold the note on the credit cards you used to buy this dinner. You have been living in my house, spending my money and pretending it was your own success. You are 3 months behind on payments. As of this morning, I have instructed the foreclosure department to accelerate the process. You are trespassing on my property." Terrence dropped the file. He looked like he was going to be sick. Henderson tossed the second file toward Jasmine. It slid across the table, knocking over a salt shaker. "Open it," Henderson commanded. Jasmine opened the folder. It contained employment contract. It contained the deed to the office building she worked in. "Carter Luxury Real Estate Group," Henderson said. "Who did you think the silent partner was, Jasmine? Who do you think paid for the lease on that office tower? Who do you think approved your commission structure?" "No," Jasmine gasped, backing away. "No, you are just a silent investor. You are retired. I am the chairman of the board," I roared, my voice filling the room. "I own 51% of the brokerage. I own the building. I own the desk you sit at. You tried to kick me out of my own building, Jasmine. You had security drag the owner out of the lobby. I did not know," she wailed, tears streaming down her face. "I swear, Dad, I did not know." "Ignorance is not a defense," I said coldly. "You treated a homeless man like trash because you thought he was beneath you. You did not know he was the man who signed your paychecks, and that makes it worse." Henderson turned to Hunter. He didn't toss a file. He just looked at him. "Mr. Vance," Henderson said, "you work for Sterling and Cooper, a fine law firm. They handle corporate litigation." "Yes," Hunter said, straightening his tie, trying to regain some dignity. "I am a junior partner." "Sterling and Cooper represents Carter Holdings in all liability matters," Henderson said. "We are their largest client. We account for 40% of their billable hours. I spoke to the managing partner, Mr. Sterling, about 10 minutes ago. I informed him that one of his junior partners insulted the chairman of Carter Holdings, threw $50 at him in an alleyway, and attempted to coerce him into a state facility." Hunter's face went gray. "Mr. Sterling was very disappointed," Henderson continued. "He asked me to inform you that your security badge has been deactivated. You are to clear out your desk by morning. Security will escort you." "Fired," Hunter whispered. "I am fired." "You are finished," I corrected him. "You are done in this city. No one will hire the lawyer who tried to commit his billionaire client to a homeless shelter." I looked at them, my family, the wolves. They were not wolves anymore. They were sheep. They were shorn, shivering, naked sheep, realizing for the first time that the winter was coming, and they had no wool. They had lived their entire adult lives standing on a platform I had built, believing they were flying. They didn't realize I was the one holding them up, and now I had just let go. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the soft sobbing of Victoria. Jordan was still standing next to me, his hand gripping my arm. He was looking at me with a mixture of awe and confusion. He didn't care about the money. I could see it in his eyes. He was just trying to reconcile the father he knew with the titan standing before him. "Dad," Jordan said softly, "is it true? Do you really own all of this?" I turned to him. My face softened. The anger that I had directed at the others evaporated when I looked at my youngest son. "Yes, son," I said, "it is true. I built it for you. I built it for all of you, but I made a mistake. I gave them too much too soon. I forgot to teach them the value of the struggle." I reached out and took the check from the table. I held it in my hand. "But you," I said, "you learned it on your own. You learned it in that cold apartment. You learned it when you tried to sell your wedding ring to feed me." I turned back to the others. They were watching me, watching the check. Hope flickered in their eyes. They thought, Maybe, just maybe, I would use it to save them. They thought I would bail them out one last time. I ripped the check in half. The sound was louder than the tearing of the intake form. Terrence gasped. Jasmine let out a little scream. I handed the torn pieces to Henderson. "Deposit this back into the charitable trust," I said. "We won't be needing it for petty cash." I looked at Terrence. "You wanted me to leave," I said. "You called a van. You wanted me out of your life. Well, congratulations, son. You got your wish. I am leaving." I turned to Jordan. "Get Emily," I said. "We are going." "Going where?" Jordan asked, dazed. "Home," I said. "To my home. The real one. And you were coming with me. Bring the rings, Jordan. We have a stop to make on the way." I walked toward the door, the guards parting to let me through. Henderson followed close behind. I didn't look back at Terrence or Jasmine. I didn't look back at the ruin I had left behind. I walked out of the restaurant, my head high, leaving the wolves to devour each other in the wreckage of their own greed. The payoff had arrived, and it was sweeter than any wine Terrence had ever tasted. The transformation in the room was instant and sickening. It was as if a director had yelled, "Cut," and the actors had swapped scripts entirely. The moment the reality of my wealth and power settled over them, the wolves shed their fangs and tried to don the wool of innocent lambs. The silence that had followed the revelation was broken, not by anger, but by the desperate scrambling sounds of my children trying to rewrite history in real time. Terrence, who moments ago had been ready to physically assault me, dragged himself across the carpet on his knees. His expensive suit was stained with the wine I had thrown, and his face was streaked with sweat and tears. But he did not care about his dignity anymore. He cared about survival. He reached for the hem of my coat, his hands trembling violently. "Dad, please," he choked out, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. "You have to understand. We were under so much pressure. The market has been brutal. The investors were breathing down my neck. I didn't know it was you. I didn't know you owned the bank. If I had known, I would have never treated you like that." I stepped back, pulling my coat from his grasp, as if his touch burned. "So it would have been acceptable to treat a stranger that way?" I asked, my voice icy. "It would have been acceptable to throw a broke old man into a van if he wasn't signing your paychecks?" "No, Dad. No, that is not what I meant," Terrence stammered, wiping his nose with his silk sleeve. "We were trying to help you, the state facility. We thought it was the best place, because we couldn't provide the care you needed. We did it out of love, Dad. We were trying to protect you from your own poverty. We love you so much." Jasmine rushed forward, pushing Terrence aside to get closer to me. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in black rivulets, making her look like a tragic clown. She clasped her hands together in a prayer gesture. "Daddy," she sobbed, using the childhood name she hadn't uttered in 30 years. "Please listen to your little girl. I was scared. When you came to the office looking like that, I panicked. I thought you had dementia. I was trying to preserve your dignity by not letting people see you that way. I didn't mean those things I said. I was just stressed. You know how hard I work. You know how much I sacrifice for the company. You sacrifice nothing," I said, looking down at her. "You were given a kingdom, and you treated it like a playground." Victoria stood up from the table, her face pale, but her eyes calculating. She smoothed her dress and tried to force a smile, attempting to use the charm that had won her pageants years ago. "Winston, darling," she said, her voice trembling but syrupy. "We are family. Families fight. Families say things they don't mean. But look at us. We are all here together. We can put this behind us. We can start over. Terrence and I were just talking about building an in-law suite at the estate, a proper one. You could live with us. We could take care of you properly now that we know you are okay." I looked at them, the begging, the pleading, the sudden, convenient amnesia about the cruelty they had displayed just minutes before. It was repulsive. They weren't sorry they had hurt me. They were sorry they had been caught. They were sorry the bank was closing in. They were sorry the gravy train had derailed and crashed into a mountain. Hunter the lawyer was the quietest. He sat in his chair staring at the wall, his face gray. He knew the law. He knew exactly what Henderson's phone call meant. He knew there was no begging his way out of a disbarment hearing. I looked at Terrence groveling on the floor. I looked at Jasmine weeping fake tears. "You say you were pressured," I said, my voice filling the room. "You say you love me. But love is not what you do when it is easy, Terrence. Love is what you do when you have nothing left. Love is selling a wedding ring to buy soup. Love is risking your career to protect a father you think is a beggar. You do not love me. You love what I can give you, and I have nothing left to give you but consequences. I turned my back on them. I physically turned away, shutting them out of my sight. I faced Jordan and Emily, who were still standing by the door, holding each other, watching the scene with wide, unbelieving eyes. They looked like survivors of a shipwreck who had just been plucked from the sea. "Jordan," I said, my voice softening instantly. He looked at me. He didn't look at the money. He didn't look at the security guards. He looked at my face, searching for the father he knew. "Dad," he whispered, "I don't understand." I walked over to him. I took his hands in mine. His hands were rough from work, calloused from grading papers and fixing things in that crumbling apartment. They were the hands of a man who built things, not a man who took things. "You don't have to understand everything right now, son," I said, "but you need to understand this. You were the only one. When I had nothing, you gave me everything. When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was sick, you bought me medicine with money you didn't have. You passed the test, Jordan, and you passed it with honor." I reached into the inner pocket of my coat. I pulled out a fresh envelope that Henderson had handed me. I placed it in Jordan's hand. "This is the check," I said. "It is a reissue, $60 million. It is yours, Jordan, all of it." Jordan looked at the envelope as if it were radioactive. He tried to push it back. "Dad, no," he said, shaking his head. "I can't take that. It is too much. I don't want your money. I just want you." "I know," I said, smiling, "and that is exactly why you are the only person in the world I trust with it. It is not just money, Jordan. It is a tool. Use it to build your schools. Use it to help your students. Use it to fix the world the way you always wanted to." Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. $60 million, she whispered. "Jordan, we could pay off the student loans. We could buy the school supplies." "We can do a lot more than that, Emily," I said. I reached into my other pocket. I pulled out a small black velvet box. It was heavy. I opened it. Inside, nestled in white satin, sat 2 rings. They were not simple gold bands. They were platinum, encrusted with flawless diamonds that caught the light of the chandelier and scattered rainbows across the room. They were magnificent. They were rings fit for royalty. "I know you sold your rings," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I know you pawned them to pay the landlord. I went back to the pawn shop this morning, Jordan. I bought them back. They are safe. They are in my safe at home, because they are the most valuable things I own. But these are for you to wear now." I handed the box to Emily. She took it, her hands trembling so hard the box shook. "Mr. Carter," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "This is too much. We can't." "You can," I said firmly. "You earned them. You earned them 1,000 times over. You showed me that loyalty is rare and precious. Wear them and remember that you are the heart of this family." I turned back to the room. I raised my voice so everyone could hear. "As of this moment, I am restructuring my estate. The trust funds are dissolved. The properties are being transferred. Jordan Carter is my sole heir. He is the new CEO of the Carter Foundation. He controls the assets. He controls the future." Terrence let out a sound like a wounded animal. "No," he wailed. "You can't do that. I am the eldest. It is my birthright." "Your birthright was opportunity," I said without looking at him. "And you squandered it." I signaled to Henderson. He stepped forward, opening his briefcase again. He pulled out a tablet and tapped the screen a few times. The sound was distinct, a digital finality. "It is done, sir," Henderson said. "Good," I said. "Now remove the trash." I turned to face my other children one last time. The time for mercy had passed. The time for justice had arrived. I looked at Terrence, who was still on his knees, but now he wasn't begging. He was staring at the floor in defeated silence. I looked at Jasmine, who was clutching the edge of the table, her knuckles white. I looked at Hunter, who was furiously typing on his phone, probably trying to save his career, which was already dead. "Henderson, execute the orders I commanded." Henderson cleared his throat. "Mr. Terrence Carter," he began reading from the tablet, "as the primary shareholder of the bank holding your mortgage, Mr. Winston Carter has exercised the acceleration clause in your loan agreement, due to 3 months of non-payment and violation of the moral turpitude clause in your contract. The foreclosure is effective immediately. The locks on your estate are being changed as we speak. Security teams are currently removing your personal effects to a storage facility. You have 24 hours to collect them, or they will be auctioned to cover your outstanding debts. Terrence looked up, his eyes hollow. "My house," he whispered. "You took my house." "It was never your house," I said coldly. "It was the bank's house, and now the bank is taking it back. Your accounts have been frozen to cover the legal fees and the outstanding loans you took against the company assets. You are bankrupt, Terrence. You have nothing." Henderson turned to Jasmine. "Mrs. Jasmine Vance," he said, "the Carter Real Estate Group has terminated your contract, effective immediately, for gross misconduct and violation of fiduciary duty. Your license is being reported to the State Board for review. You are barred from entering any Carter properties, including your former office. Security is waiting to escort you from the premises if you attempt to return. Furthermore, the lease on your luxury apartment has been terminated by the owner, who happens to be a subsidiary of Carter Holdings. You have until noon tomorrow to vacate." Jasmine screamed. It was a raw, primal sound of rage. "You can't do this," she yelled, lunging toward me. "I will sue you. I will take everything. You will take nothing," I roared, stepping forward and making her flinch back. "You have no money for lawyers, Jasmine. You have no leverage. You have no reputation. You are done." Finally, Henderson looked at Hunter. "Mr. Vance, you have already received the notification from your firm, but Mr. Carter would like to add that he has filed a formal complaint with the Bar Association regarding your attempt to coerce a senior citizen into signing away his rights while under duress. We have the document you tried to make him sign. We have witnesses. You will be lucky if you avoid prison time, Hunter. You will certainly never practice law again." Hunter dropped his phone. It clattered to the floor, echoing the sound of his life falling apart. "Security," I said, raising my hand. The 4 guards who had been standing at the perimeter stepped forward. They moved with efficiency and speed. 2 of them grabbed Terrence, hauling him up by his armpits. He didn't fight. He went limp, his legs dragging on the carpet. "Get your hands off me," Jasmine shrieked, as a guard took her arm. "Do you know who I am?" "You are nobody," the guard said, pushing her toward the door. Victoria tried to grab her purse, but Henderson stopped her. "That bag was purchased with a company credit card, Mrs. Carter," Henderson said. "It remains here." Victoria let go of the bag, crying hysterically. They were herded toward the shattered doors like cattle. The patrons in the restaurant, who had watched the entire scene in stunned silence, parted ways to let them pass. There was no pity in the room, only the cold, hard realization that justice had been served. I watched them go. I watched my firstborn son, the boy I had held in my arms, dragged out of my life. I watched my daughter, who I had walked down the aisle, pushed out into the night. It hurt. It hurt more than I could express, but it was a necessary pain, like cutting out a gangrenous limb to save the body. "Get them out of here," I said, my voice low and final, "and make sure they never come near me or my son again." The doors swung shut behind them, leaving only silence in their wake. I turned to Jordan and Emily. They were holding the check and the ring box, looking at me with awe. "Let's go home," I said to them. "I have a car waiting. And Jordan, we are stopping for pizza. I am starving, and I believe you owe me a dinner that doesn't involve beans." Jordan laughed, a wet, tearful sound. "Pizza sounds good, Dad," he said. We walked out of the restaurant together, leaving the wreckage of the past behind us, ready to build a future that was based on something real. The fall from grace is not a straight line. It is a jagged cliff face that tears you apart on the way down. For Terrence and Jasmine, hitting the bottom was not just painful, it was a masterclass in irony. 30 days ago, they were sipping champagne and planning my exile to a state facility. Today, Terrence is pouring coffee for truck drivers at a 24-hour diner on the edge of the interstate. I went to see him once from a distance, sitting in the back of my tinted sedan. He looked 10 years older. His silk suits were gone, replaced by a polyester uniform that was too tight around the shoulders. He had burn marks on his hands from the grill. I watched him wipe down a sticky table, his face a mask of exhaustion and resentment. He dropped a fork and bent to pick it up, groaning with the same back pain I had felt sleeping in his tool shed. He was learning what it meant to serve people he considered beneath him. He was learning that $1 is not just a number on a screen. It is 60 minutes of standing on feet that ache until they are numb. Jasmine fared no better. The real estate world is small, and word travels fast. No reputable firm would touch her. She was now working the counter at a discount clothing store in a strip mall, folding the same cheap fabrics she used to mock. I heard through Henderson that she was living in a studio apartment smaller than her old walk-in closet, sharing a bathroom with 3 other tenants. Her husband Hunter was disbarred and delivering food on a bicycle, his days of arguing in court replaced by arguing with customers about cold fries. They were living the life they had tried to force upon me. They were counting pennies. They were worrying about rent. They were tasting the bitter metallic flavor of genuine need. And the worst part for them wasn't the poverty. It was the knowledge that they had held the winning lottery ticket in their hands and tore it up because they were too arrogant to read the numbers. Jordan did not change. That was the miracle. Most men given $60 million would buy a yacht or a private island. Jordan bought 30 new computers for his school's library. He didn't quit his job. He showed up the next Monday just as he always had, driving a new safe Volvo instead of his rusted sedan, but wearing the same determined expression. He didn't want to leave his students. He wanted to save them. He used the money to start a breakfast program, ensuring no child in his district ever sat through a history lesson with an empty stomach. He fixed the roof of the gymnasium. He paid off the lunch debt of every family in the county. I live with them now in the main estate. But it doesn't feel like a museum anymore. It feels like a home. Emily quit her double shifts, but she didn't stop being a nurse. She opened a free clinic in the city center, funded by the Carter Foundation, providing care to the people the system had forgotten. We have dinner together every night. Real dinners. We laugh. We talk. The dining room table, which used to be a stage for Terrence's vanity, is now covered in lesson plans and architectural drawings for the new community center Jordan is building. Yesterday, I walked into the kitchen and found Jordan washing dishes. He has a staff now, people paid to do that for him, but he still insists on doing it himself sometimes. He says it keeps him grounded. I looked at his hands soapy and wet, and I saw the diamond ring I had given him glinting in the light. He caught me watching and smiled. "It fits perfectly, Dad," he said. He wasn't talking about the ring. He was talking about his life. He was talking about the balance he had found between having means and having meaning. He had taken the power I gave him, and instead of building a wall, he had built a longer table. He was the son I had always wanted, and the man I aspired to be. I spend my days in the garden now. I watch the sun go down over the estate that was once a symbol of my isolation, and is now the headquarters of a revolution in kindness. I think about Terrence and Jasmine often. I don't hate them anymore. Hate takes too much energy. I feel a distant pity for them. They are on a journey now, a hard one, but a necessary one. Maybe one day, when they have scrubbed enough floors and folded enough shirts, they will understand. Maybe they will learn that you cannot look down on people you depend on. Maybe they will find their own redemption in the sweat of their brow. But until then, I have a legacy to build. Not a legacy of gold bars and stock options, but a legacy of character. I look at my life and I realize that the greatest investment I ever made wasn't in tech or real estate. It was in the boy who opened the door when I had nothing. Money is a strange thing. It is like water. It can quench your thirst or it can drown you. It takes the shape of the container it is poured into. In Terrence, it became poison. In Jordan, it became life. To everyone watching this, I want to leave you with one thought. The people you step on to get to the top are the same people who will be waiting for you when you fall. And you will fall. Everyone does eventually. So, build your foundation on something stronger than cash. Build it on loyalty. Build it on truth. And never, ever underestimate the quiet person in the corner. They might just be the one holding the keys to the kingdom. My name is Winston Carter. I was a billionaire who pretended to be a beggar. And in doing so, I found the only thing that really matters. I found my son. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed this journey, please like this video and share it with someone who needs a reminder about what truly matters. And don't forget to subscribe. I have a lot more work to do, and I would love for you to be a part of it. Until next time, take care of each other. Through this ordeal, I discovered that adversity is the ultimate truth serum. Wealth can build mansions, but it cannot build character. My children, who possessed everything, gave me nothing but contempt, while the son who had nothing offered me his very survival. This journey proved that true family is not defined by bloodlines or inheritances, but by who stands beside you when the storm hits. If you measure your worth by your bank account, you will always be poor. But if you measure it by the love and loyalty you cultivate, you are richer than any king. That is the only legacy worth leaving. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about justice and redemption. Let me know in the comments, what would you have done in Jordan's place?